The sky above the shattered moon of Vorgos 4 was not bleeding. It was burning. Violent streaks of violet and sulphurous yellow tore through the atmosphere, lighting up the jagged obsidian ridges where the battle raged. The ground shuddered with the rhythmic, bone-rattling thrum of heavy orbital bombardment. Every impact threw up geysers of ash and pulverized rock, coating the armor of the dead and the dying in a unified gray. Jace scrambled over a ridge, his breath tearing at his lungs like swallowed glass. His combat suit was compromised, the internal heads-up display flickering with critical warnings he ignored. In his arms, he half-carried, half-dragged a figure wrapped in shimmering gold-weave silk, the Sarathian queen. She was unconscious, her regal features pale, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around them. "Move," he told himself. "Just move." To his right, a blur of motion cut through the smoke. It was Lyra. She was magnificent and terrifying. Her combat armor was rent in places, revealing the indigo skin beneath, but she moved with a fluid, lethal grace that made the human soldiers look like stumbling children. Her bioluminescent markings, intricate, glowing swirls of azure light along her arms and neck, pulsed rapidly, syncing with her heartbeat. She wielded a dual-phase energy pike, spinning it in a defensive arc that deflected a barrage of incoming plasma fire. The superheated bolts hissed as they struck her weapon, scattering like angry sparks. "We have to make the shuttle," Jace shouted over the roar of a nearby detonation. Lyra did not look at him. Her golden, slit-pupiled eyes were scanning the ridgeline. "They are tracking the thermal signature," she yelled back, her voice harmonic and fierce. "Get her to the airlock. I will hold the line." "No!" Jace adjusted his grip on the queen. "We go together!" A dropship screamed overhead, bearing the crest of the queen's own imperial fleet, but its cannons swiveled toward them. Betrayal. It was the only word that made sense of the carnage. The assassins were not foreign invaders, they were the queen's own guard. Lyra saw it coming. With a cry that sounded like tearing metal, she threw herself in front of Jace and the queen just as a heavy plasma mortar struck the ground 3 meters away. The shockwave lifted Jace off his feet. He hit the dirt hard, curling his body around the monarch. When the dust cleared, he looked up, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. Lyra was down. She lay amidst the scorched rocks. Her armor shattered across her ribs, a terrible burn searing the glowing patterns on her side. Blue blood, dark and viscous, pooled beneath her. "Lyra!" Jace scrambled toward her, dragging the queen with one desperate heave. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Her glowing markings were dimming, flickering like a dying bulb. "Go. Human," she rasped. "Not a chance." Jace grabbed the strap of her harness. He hauled her up, his muscles screaming in protest. He had the queen on his left shoulder, Lyra supported by his right. He was one man carrying the weight of an empire and a friend. "You both leave this battlefield alive. That is an order." They stumbled toward the crashed royal shuttle, the ramp hissing open. Jace shoved them inside, his vision blurring. He turned to seal the hatch, but he saw it then. A silver device planted in the rubble, pulsing with a strange, sickly green energy. It wasn't an explosive. It was something else, something worse. The device let out a resonant hum that vibrated in Jace's teeth. Lyra reached for him from the floor of the shuttle. "Jace!" The world went white, not a light, but a total absence of sensory input. Sound vanished, pain vanished, the memory of Lyra's face, the war, his name, it all dissolved into static. Jace woke up gasping, his hands clawing at the empty air. He was not on a battlefield. He was in a bunk that smelled of stale, recycled air and hydraulic fluid. The only light came from the blinking amber LED of the comms panel. He sat up, sweat cooling on his forehead. his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The dream again, or rather, the fragment of it. The whiteout. He rubbed his face with calloused hands, trying to push away the lingering sensation of ash in his mouth. It had been 5 years, maybe 6. He wasn't sure. The timeline of his life before the Rusty Heron was a blurred watercolor painting left out in the rain. He knew he had been a soldier. The scars on his back and the way he automatically scanned every room for exits told him that. But the specifics, they were gone, taken by what the med docs called traumatic neural dissociation. "Captain, are you dying?" A dry, synthesized voice asked from the ceiling speakers. Jace groaned, swinging his legs over the side of the bunk. "Not today." "Helix, why are we awake?" "We are docked at Oxtrad Station," the AI replied, "and your heart rate spiked to 180 beats per minute. I was preparing to defibrillate you." "Don't touch the paddles," Jace muttered, standing up and stretching. His back popped in 3 places. "Just a nightmare." "You have had 4 nightmares this week," Helix noted. "That is a 20% increase from last month. Perhaps you should consume less of the fermented engine coolant you call whiskey. It's bourbon, and it's distinctively mediocre," Jace corrected. He pulled on a grease-stained flight suit, checking the seals. "How's the fuel intake? Refueling is complete. However, our credit balance is critically low. We have enough for departure and perhaps a sandwich. A small sandwich." Jace sighed, looking at his reflection in the tarnished metal of the bulkhead. He looked older than his 35 years. There were gray streaks in his messy dark hair, and lines around his eyes that spoke of too much glaring at starlight and not enough sleep. He was a smuggler now. A low-stakes, no-questions courier moving contraband that wasn't dangerous enough to get him killed, just illegal enough to pay the bills. He avoided politics. He avoided war zones. And he absolutely avoided thinking about the gap in his head where his past should be. "I'm going to the driftwood," Jace said, grabbing his jacket. "If anyone asks, we're hauling agricultural machinery parts. We are hauling illegal synthetic spices," Helix corrected. "Details. Helix. Details." Oxtrad Station was a rusting hulk of metal spinning lazily on the edge of the Orion Coalition. It was a place where ships went to die and people went to disappear. The air in the docking ring tasted of ozone and fried protein. Jace walked with his head down, shoulders hunched, blending into the flow of dock workers, drifters, and multi-limbed mechanics. The Driftwood Lounge was exactly the kind of hole-in-the-wall Jace preferred. The lighting was low, hiding the grime on the floor, and the music was a thumping, bass-heavy drone that made conversation difficult, which was the point. Jace slid into a booth at the back, nodding to the bartender, a 4-armed sentient who slid a glass of amber liquid across the scratched table without asking. Jace nursed the drink, watching the door. He was waiting for a contact who had a line on some rapid delivery medical supplies. Boring, safe, steady work. Instead, the crowd parted. She walked in like she owned the gravity plating. She was wearing a heavy traveler's cloak, the hood pulled up. But the way she moved was unmistakable, fluid, predatory. While everyone else in the bar shuffled or stomped, she glided. She scanned the room, her gaze bypassing the brawlers and the gamblers, locking instantly onto Jace. Jace tensed, his hand dropping beneath the table to the stun blaster holstered at his hip. He didn't know her, but his instincts were screaming that she was dangerous. She approached his booth and sat down without asking. Up close, he could see beneath the hood. Her skin was a deep twilight indigo, and her eyes were gold, vertically slit like a cat's. Faint geometric markings on her face glowed with a soft, pulsing bioluminescence. A Sarathian. You didn't see many of them this far out in the rim. They stuck to their glittering core worlds. You are the pilot known as Jace, she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was melodic but had an edge of steel to it. Depends on who's asking, Jace said, keeping his face neutral. And who they work for. I work for myself, she said. I need passage to the Sarathian border. Immediate departure. Jace laughed, a short, dry sound. Sarathian space? Lady, that's a restricted zone. The border patrols are tight, and I don't run blockades. Try the shuttle lines. The shuttle lines ask for identification, she said, leaning forward. I require discretion and speed. Look, I transport cargo, not people. Passengers are heavy. They complain about the smell, and they need life support. I will pay you 20,000 credits, she said. Jace choked on his drink. He set the glass down, staring at her. That was enough to refuel the Heron for a year. It was enough to upgrade the shields, fix the hyperdrive stabilizer, and maybe buy a sandwich that wasn't small. Half now, half on arrival, she continued. Plus a bonus if we avoid all official scanning boys. Jace narrowed his eyes. 20,000 for a taxi ride? You're running from something or someone. No questions, she said. That is the reputation you sell, is it not? Jace studied her. There was something in her eyes, a mix of imperious command and terrified desperation. It tugged at something deep in his brain, a phantom itch he couldn't scratch. He should say no. This screamed trouble. This screamed politics. Done, Jace said against his better judgment. But if you bring heat down on my ship, I dump you in an escape pod, unclear? Crystal, she said. My name is Lyra. Jace paused. The name sent a shiver down his spine, a déjà vu so strong it made him dizzy. Lyra. He rolled the name around in his mind, but it found no purchase. Jace, he said, extending a hand. She looked at his hand for a moment, hesitation flickering across her face. Then she took it. Her skin was cool and smooth, but her grip was iron hard. She squeezed his hand, searching his face with an intensity that made him want to squirm. I know, she said softly. The journey began in silence. Lyra brought only one item aboard, a sleek silver case that she refused to let Helix scan. She stowed it in her cabin and locked the door. Jace spent the first 6 hours on the bridge, plotting a course that wove through asteroid belts and magnetic nebulas, staying well clear of the trade lanes. When he finally went down to the mess deck for coffee, he found Lyra inspecting the cargo hold. She had removed her cloak. She wore a fitted tunic and trousers that allowed for movement, the fabric dark and utilitarian. She was standing next to a crate of engine parts that weighed easily 200 kilos. It had shifted during the launch, before Jace could offer to get the grav lift. Lyra bent her knees, gripped the crate, and lifted it. She didn't grunt. She didn't strain. She simply hoisted the massive box and slid it back into the secure netting with one hand. Jace stopped in the doorway, his mug halfway to his mouth. That crate weighs more than the engine block, he said. Lyra turned, looking surprised. It was blocking the walkway. You just picked it up. Sarathian gravity is 1.5 times standard, she said, dusting off her hands. And I have had training. You humans are so fragile. It is a wonder you survived leaving your own atmosphere. Hey, Jace protested, walking over. Y'all were durable. We bounce. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on the scar running along his jawline. You bleed easily, and you break. Jace felt a strange flush of heat. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the way she looked at him, like she was cataloging his injuries, like she knew where they all were. So, he said, leaning against a bulkhead, trying to recover his cool. You a weightlifter back home? Or just showing off? I was a guardian, she said, her tone clipping shut. Right, no questions. Jace took a sip of his coffee. But if you start throwing my cargo around, I'm charging extra for handling fees. She tilted her head, confused. Why would I throw it? I just moved it, and it's a joke. Lyra, a figure of speech. She said, her expression serious. Human humor. It relies heavily on falsehoods, does it not? It relies on timing. Mostly. Jace stepped closer to check the netting she had secured. He realized too late that the corridor was narrow. He was standing inside her personal space. She smelled of something electric, like a thunderstorm about to break, mixed with a sweet, alien floral scent. He looked down at her neck, where the bioluminescent markings swirled in elegant loops. They were pulsing slowly, a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Jace stared at the light, mesmerized. A vague image flashed in his mind, those same lights, but frantic, blindingly bright, amidst smoke. Lyra shifted, her shoulder brushing his chest as the ship hit a pocket of turbulence. Jace instinctively reached out to steady her, his hand gripping her upper arm. Her muscles were rock hard beneath the soft skin. For a second, neither of them moved. Her golden eyes locked onto his, widening slightly. The air in the corridor seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, overwhelming tension. It wasn't just fear or suspicion. It was magnetic. Jace pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. Sorry. Turbulence. Lyra didn't look away. Her voice was lower now. You used to have better balance. Jace blinked. Used to? Before, she said quickly, turning away and adjusting a strap on the crate. In general. For a pilot. Right, Jace muttered, backing out of the hold. I'll be on the bridge. Try not to dent the floor. He retreated to the safety of the cockpit, his heart rate uncomfortably high. Helix. Run a diagnostic on the atmospheric scrubbers. The scrubbers are functioning at 99% efficiency, Helix replied. Check them anyway. Jace snapped. It's getting hot in here. 2 days into the trip, the silence of deep space was shattered. Proximity alert, Helix announced, his voice devoid of panic but loud enough to wake the dead. Vessel intercepting. Bearing 220. Moving at attack speed. Jace threw his coffee into the disposal and vaulted into the pilot's seat. On the main screen, a ship was growing from a speck of light into a terrifying predator. It was sleek, black, and shaped like a dagger. It didn't look like a pirate skiff when it looked like money and death. Sarathian design, Jace said, his hands flying across the console. Shields up. Helix, get me an ID. Signature matches a Sarathian Spectre-class interceptor, Helix said. Imperial security. Jace swore. He slapped the intercom. Lyra, get to the bridge. She was there before he finished the sentence, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. She took one look at the screen and went pale. It is a hunter. I thought you said we were avoiding checkpoints. They are not a checkpoint, Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the tactical overlay with practiced ease. They are hunting us. The comms crackled to life. Unidentified freighter. You are harboring a fugitive and stolen Imperial property. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. You have 10 seconds. Jace looked at Lyra. Stolen property? The case, she said, not looking at him. We cannot stop. If they board, we are both dead. Jace gritted his teeth. Hold on to something. He didn't wait for the countdown. He slammed the throttle forward and killed the inertial dampeners. The gray heron lurched, spinning on its axis in a move that should have sheared the wings off. The interceptor opened fire. Green bolts of plasma streaked past the cockpit, sizzling against the void shields. Jace dove the ship into the debris field of a nearby shattered moon, a graveyard of old mining equipment. He flew by instinct, his conscious mind turning off as his body took over. He banked hard around a floating asteroid, threaded the needle between two derelict satellites, and rolled inverted. It was insane flying. It was military-grade evasion, and Jace had no idea how he knew how to do it. They are too fast. Jace yelled as the interceptor stuck to their tail like a shadow. I can't shake them. Align the rear deflector, Lyra commanded, spinning the tactical chair to access the manual gunnery controls. Give me 3 seconds of stable flight. Are you crazy? If I fly straight, they'll vaporize us. Just do it, she roared. Jace trusted her. He didn't know why, but the command in her voice bypassed his logic and hit his reflexes. He leveled the ship out. 1, 2. The interceptor lined up its shot. Lyra fired. She didn't use the targeting computer. She fired a manual burst from the rear quad cannons. The shots didn't aim for the cockpit. They thread the impossible gap between the interceptor's shields and its port intake manifold. The enemy ship's engine flared brilliant white, then died. The interceptor tumbled away, spinning out of control but intact. Direct hit on propulsion, Helix reported. Enemy vessel disabled. Life signs stable. Jace punched the hyperdrive. The stars elongated into streaks of blue light, and the gray heron vanished into subspace. For a long minute, the only sound on the bridge was the heavy breathing of 2 people who had just cheated death. Jace spun his chair around. What the hell was that? Lyra was slumped in the gunnery chair, sweat glistening on her forehead. That was survival. You shot out their intake manifold, Jace said, his voice rising, without a computer lock. While we were moving at 0.4 light speed, that's not survival. Lyra, that's impossible. I am a good shot, she said weakly. And that ship, that was a hit squad. Jace stood up, looming over her. You didn't just steal some jewelry, did you? What is in the case? Lyra looked up, her eyes defiant. Evidence. Of what? Treason, she said. Jace ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small bridge. I'm a smuggler. Lyra, I move spices, I move machine parts, I don't move treason. You nearly got my ship turned into scrap metal. I saved your ship, Lyra snapped, standing up to meet him. And I paid you to transport me. The terms were no questions. The terms changed when an Imperial hunter tried to incinerate us. Jace yelled, Who are you, really? I told you, she said, stepping closer, her bioluminescence flaring with her anger. I was a royal guard. My duty was to the Queen. Was? She failed to protect herself from the vipers in her own court, Lyra said bitterly. There is a conspiracy, a plot to overthrow the monarchy and plunge the sector into war. The case contains proof. And why you? Jace asked. Why is a lone guard running with the most dangerous data in the galaxy? Because I am the only one left who remembers what loyalty means, she shouted, her voice cracked, and for a moment, the warrior mask slipped. She looked incredibly young and incredibly tired. She turned away, murmuring to herself, her voice barely a whisper. I promised you I'd keep her alive, even if you forgot. Jace froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. What did you say? He asked. Lyra stiffened. Nothing. You said you... Jace stepped closer, grabbing her shoulder to turn her around. I promised you, who are you talking about? Lyra winced, pulling away. Jace looked down and saw a scorch mark on her forearm, a burn from the console overload during the fight. You're hurt, he said, the anger instantly replaced by a reflex of concern. It is superficial, she said. Sit down, Jace ordered, pointing to the door. We're going to the med bay, now. She didn't argue. The medical bay was quiet, the white lights humming softly. Jace applied a Regen gel to the burn on Lyra's arm. His hands were gentle, precise. He worked in silence, cleaning the wound and wrapping it. Lyra sat on the exam table, watching him. The adrenaline of the fight was fading, leaving a charged, heavy atmosphere in the small room. They were close, too close. Jace could feel the heat radiating from her skin. He finished the bandage and looked up. He found her staring right at his eyes. "Why did you fly like that?" she asked softly. "Like what?" "Like a soldier," she said. "Like an ace. You executed a Vorgos drift back there. Smugglers do not know that maneuver." "I don't know," Jace admitted, his voice rough. "I just did it. My hands knew where to go." He stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, trying to put distance between them, but the room felt like it was shrinking. The air was thick with unspoken words. He looked at her, really looked at her. The curve of her jaw, the way her golden eyes seemed to hold a galaxy of sorrow, the pulsing blue light on her skin. A sudden, sharp pain spiked behind his eye. Flash. Smoke. The smell of burning ozone. Blood on his hands. Blue blood. He was holding someone. He was screaming a name. "Lyra!" Jace stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter. "Jace?" Lyra slid off the table. She stepped into his space, her face inches from his. He looked at her, and the overlay of the memory ghosted over her face. He saw her dying. He saw himself saving her. Lyra saw the recognition in his eyes. She saw the crack in the wall. Her expression shifted from worry to a heart-breaking hope. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above his chest. "Do you remember me?" "Human," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Years ago, I saved the alien queen's life in battle. The words were a key, a trigger, the battlefield, the explosion, the promise. It surged up, threatening to drown him. The pain was unbearable. If he remembered, he would have to feel it all, the loss, the years of emptiness, the horror of the war. No." Jace shoved the memory down. He walled it off with panic and denial. He couldn't be that man. That man was a hero. Jace was just a guy with a debt-ridden ship and a drinking problem. He pulled back, slapping her hand away gently but firmly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice shaking. Lyra stood frozen, the hope in her eyes shattered, replaced by a cold, hard hurt. She looked at his hand, then back to his face. She saw the lie. She saw the fear. "You are a coward, Jace," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I'm just a pilot," he rasped. Lyra straightened up, the warrior mask sliding back into place. She turned and walked to the door, stopping at the threshold. "Then fly the ship, pilot, and do not ask me about the past again." She walked out, leaving Jace alone in the humming silence of the med bay, his hands shaking as the ghost of a memory clawed at the back of his mind, begging to be let in. The gray heron shuddered as it engaged the docking clamps of Station K7, a sprawling, chaotic hub located in the lawless neutral zone between human space and the Sarathian border. The station looked like a metallic tumor growing out of a hollowed-out asteroid, stitched together with neon lights, rusted scaffolding, and the desperate commerce of 1,000 different species. Jace killed the engines and leaned back in the pilot's seat, rubbing the grit from his eyes. The flight from the ambush had been tense, a silent marathon of checking sensors and watching Lyra out of the corner of his eye. She sat in the co-pilot seat, rigid as a statue, staring at the approaching station with a mix of disdain and calculation. "We need supplies," Jace said, breaking the silence that had stretched for 3 hours. "Fuel cells, coolant, and a decrypt key for that case of yours." My onboard systems can't crack Sarathian military encryption without tripping alarms. Lyra stood up, pulling her hood low over her face to obscure her glowing markings. I know a broker here. He deals in information that the Coalition ignores and the Empire wants buried. Jace grabbed his jacket and checked the charge on his stun blaster. Just keep your head down. This isn't a royal court. It is a hive of scum, villainy, and overpriced noodles. They disembarked into the main promenade, a sensory assault of noise and color. The air recycled through the station's vents smelled of ozone, unwashed bodies, and exotic spices frying in vats of oil. Drones the size of hummingbirds buzzed overhead, their camera lenses irising in and out as they scanned the crowd for bounties, though most people here had paid enough bribes to remain invisible. Jace moved with the practiced slouch of a local, keeping his hands near his pockets. Lyra, despite her attempt at blending in, moved with a prowling grace that drew eyes. She didn't walk, she flowed. They passed a row of street food vendors hawking wares from a dozen systems. Steam hissed from iron griddles. A vendor with 4 arms and a beak shouted at them, holding up a skewer of meat that was currently on fire. Lyra stopped, sniffing the air. Is that sustenance? Jace glanced at the burning skewer. That is a magma root kebab. Humans eat it on a dare. It is mostly capsaicin and regret. Lyra looked intrigued. I require calories. My metabolism is running high after the combat. She tossed a credit chip to the vendor and took the skewer. Before Jace could warn her, she bit off a chunk of the flaming meat. Jace winced, waiting for the coughing fit or the watering eyes. Lyra chewed thoughtfully, the flames flickering out inside her mouth. She swallowed, then looked at the vendor. It lacks texture, but the heat is pleasant, like a mild solar flare. Jace stared at her. You are kidding. That would melt a hole in my stomach. Sarathian physiology, she said, taking another bite as they kept walking. We are evolved for high-temperature environments. Your spice is merely a suggestion of warmth. Jace shook his head, a small, involuntary smile cracking his grim mood. Remind me never to challenge you to a drinking contest. We tried that once, Lyra said quietly, her eyes fixed straight ahead. You lost. The smile vanished from Jace's face. The casual reference to a past he couldn't remember felt like a door slamming in his face. He focused on the crowd, pushing the frustration down. They navigated the labyrinthine back alleys of the station until they reached a dimly lit shop nestled between a droid repair bay and a suspiciously empty warehouse. The sign above the door flickered in glitchy Aribesh. Information salvage. Inside. The air was cool and smelled of antiseptic. Banks of servers hummed along the walls, and sitting behind a desk made of stacked hard drives was a creature that looked like a cybernetic spider wearing a waistcoat. Vex, Lyra said, stepping into the light. The broker spun around, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. He chittered, a sound that was translated by a vocoder around his neck into a flat mechanical voice. The Royal Guard returns. I heard you were dead, or exiled, or both. I need a clean room, Lyra said, placing the silver case on the desk, and a decrypt algorithm for a Type 4 Sarathian seal. Vex tapped his metallic legs on the desk. Expensive. Very expensive. Imperial encryption is nasty business. It eats standard processors for breakfast. Jace stepped forward, leaning on the desk. We have credits. Credits are boring. Vex droned. Inflation is up. The market is volatile. I want something else. Name it, Jace said. Embarrassing secrets, Vex said, his mechanical voice hitching with what might have been a laugh. I trade in leverage. Tell me something true that you have never told anyone else. That is my price for the room. Jace stiffened. He hated these kinds of games. Look, buddy, I don't have secrets. I have a hangover and a schedule. Everyone has secrets. Human, Vex hissed, especially those who claim to have none. Lyra stepped in. I will pay. She leaned down, whispering something into the broker's auditory receptor. Jace couldn't hear it, but he saw Vex's posture shift. The broker went still, then nodded slowly. Acceptable. That is, significant leverage. Vex pressed a button under the desk, and a heavy blast door hissed open at the back of the shop. The room is yours. The algorithm is running on the terminal. Do not break anything. Jace followed Lyra into the secure room. It was soundproofed, the walls lined with lead to block scanning. As the door sealed shut, locking them in, Jace looked at her. What did you tell him? Lyra set the case down on the central table and didn't look up. Nothing that concerns you. She connected the case to the terminal. The screen flashed red, then green as Vex's expensive algorithm chewed through the lock. With a pneumatic hiss, the silver case popped open. Inside lay a single data crystal, glowing with a malevolent crimson light. Lyra slotted it into the room's hollow projector. The air above the table shimmered and coalesced into a three-dimensional map of the Sarathian Empire. Troop movements were marked in red vectors, swarming around the capital sector like angry hornets. Documents scrolled by in the air, manifests, bank transfers, communication logs. This is the proof, Lyra said, her voice hard. Look at the timestamps. Jace squinted at the floating text. These are dated 3 months ago. Troop mobilizations to the outer rim. Fake mobilizations, Lyra corrected. The High General is moving loyalist fleets away from the capital under the guise of a border skirmish with humanity. He is leaving the Queen defenseless. She swiped her hand through the air, bringing up a new file. A video recording played. It showed a shadowy room where a group of Sarathian nobles sat around a table. At the head of the table sat a massive Sarathian male in military dress uniform, the High General. On the wall behind him hung a banner Jace didn't recognize, a stylized silver serpent coiling around a broken sword. The Serpent faction, Lyra spat. They believe the Queen is weak because she seeks peace with other species. They want to return to the old ways, conquest, subjugation. The recording played on. The general was speaking. The human threat is the perfect catalyst. The general's voice rumbled. We will detonate the bioagent in the lower city. We will blame human saboteurs. The Queen's soft policies will be seen as the cause of the massacre. The Council will have no choice but to strip her of command and grant me emergency powers. Jace felt a chill go cold in his stomach. A bioagent. They are going to gas their own people just to stage a coup? And blame it on you, Lyra said. On humanity. It would start a war that would burn half the galaxy. She manipulated the controls again. But there is more. To make the lie convincing, they need a history of betrayal. They have falsified the records of the Battle of Dawn Vale. The hologram shifted. The grainy, chaotic footage of a war zone flickered into view. It was the same landscape from Jace's nightmare. The obsidian ridges, the violet sky. Jace stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. In the footage, the camera shook violently. It zoomed in on a ridge. A Sarathian warrior, Lyra, younger, her armor gleaming, was fighting back-to-back with a human soldier. The human's face was blurred by digital distortion, likely corruption in the file, but his movements were clear. He moved with a reckless, kinetic violence, using a jagged piece of metal as a shield, firing a kinetic rifle with one hand while dragging a wounded Sarathian with the other. Jace watched the human figure. He watched the way the man ducked a plasma bolt, a sharp, jerky tilt of the head to the left. He watched the way the man reloaded his weapon, slapping the magazine against his thigh before jamming it home. It was like looking in a mirror. "That is you," Lyra said softly. Jace shook his head, backing away until his back hit the cold metal wall. "No, that is just some grunt. Look at the movement. Jace, you favor your right leg when you pivot. You check your 6 every 3 seconds. Lots of soldiers do that." "Not like that," she insisted. "We were the only ones on that ridge. The Queen's personal shuttle had crashed. We held off a battalion for 20 minutes, just us." She pointed to the hologram. The human soldier in the recording shouted something, pointing at the sky. Though the audio was garbled, Jace could almost read the lips. "Incoming." "I don't remember it," Jace said, his voice tight. "I don't remember being a hero." "Lyra. I remember waking up in a hospital ship with a headache and a discharge paper that said I was medically unfit. Because they took it from you." Lyra slammed her hand on the table, making the hologram flicker. The general and the Queen. They made a deal. The Sarathian nobles demanded a scapegoat for the security breach. They wanted to execute the human who had touched the Queen. To save your life. The Queen agreed to have your memory wiped and your records sealed. Jace stared at her. "The Queen? The one you are trying to save? She did this to me?" "It was that or your death," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She wept when she signed the order. I stood there and watched her break. Jace laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "So I am just a loose end, a pawn you all moved around the board. And now you want me to help you save the woman who erased my life?" "I want you to help me save the galaxy from a war," Lyra said. "And I want you to reclaim what is yours." Before Jace could answer, a proximity alarm blared from his wrist comp. "Helix." He snapped into his comms. "What is it?" "Captain, sensors detect 4 armed individuals approaching your location." The AI replied, "They are not local law enforcement." Their heat signatures match the bio-augmentation profile of Sarathian void stalkers. "Assassins," Lyra said, killing the hologram and snapping the case shut. "They found us." "How?" Jace drew his blaster. "We were careful." "Vex," Lyra growled. "He sold us out. Double dip on the profit." The blast door hissed. Sparks flew as a plasma cutter began to slice through the lock mechanism from the outside. "We need an exit," Jace said, scanning the room. "There, a ventilation grate near the ceiling." Lyra looked at it. "It is too small." "For a Sarathian, maybe," Jace said, grabbing a chair and jamming it under the door handle to buy them seconds. "But you are flexible. Go!" The door buckled as a heavy impact slammed against it. Lyra vaulted onto the table, then leaped for the grate, ripping it loose with one hand. She pulled herself up, then reached down. "Take my hand!" Jace grabbed her wrist. She hauled him up just as the blast door exploded inward. 4 figures in matte black armor stormed the room, weapons raised. They fired at the ceiling, plasma bolts scorching the metal inches from Jace's boots as he scrambled into the dark tunnel. "Move!" Jace yelled, crawling on his hands and knees through the cramped shaft. They scrambled through the bowels of the station, the assassins hot on their heels. They burst out of a maintenance hatch 3 levels down, sprinting through a crowded bazaar. Jace overturned a cart of glowing fruit to create a barrier. Lyra didn't slow down. She ran along the wall for 3 steps to bypass a crowd of tourists, then dropped back beside him. They reached the airlock where the gray heron was docked. Jace slammed his hand on the panel. "Open up! Helix! We have guests!" The airlock cycled open, and they dove inside just as a sniper shot pinged off the outer hull. "Get us out of here!" Jace screamed, sprinting for the cockpit. By the time he strapped in, Helix had already decoupled the clamps. The ship shot away from the station, engines flaring blue. Jace threw the ship into a chaotic spin to dodge the station's automated defense turrets, which the assassins had likely hacked. Only when they were in warp, the stars stretching into safe, infinite lines of light, did Jace finally let go of the controls. He sat there, chest heaving, sweat soaking his shirt. He spun the chair around. Lyra was standing in the doorway of the cockpit. She had removed her cloak, her armor was scuffed, and there was a smear of grease on her cheek. "You," Jace said, pointing a finger at her, "you are a chaos magnet." "I told you they would come," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "You didn't tell me they were void stalkers," Jace shouted, unbuckling and standing up. "Those guys don't just kill you, they disassemble you. I am a smuggler." "Lyra, I run Spice. I don't fight Imperial death squads. We survived," she said. "Barely." Jace paced the small bridge, his anger boiling over, anger at the danger, but mostly anger at the confusion in his head. And for what? For a queen who lobotomized me? For a past I can't see? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes blazing. For the truth. Is that not worth fighting for? "Not if I am dead," Jace yelled back. He was close to her now, invading her space. "Why do you care so much? Why did you come back for me? You could have hired anyone. You could have hired a mercenary army with that case." "Why me?" "Because I trust you," Lyra screamed back. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra's chest heaved. Her bioluminescence was flaring bright azure, pulsing with her erratic heartbeat. "Because despite what they did to your mind, I know your soul, Jace. I know that you are the man who held the line when everyone else ran. I know that you are the only one who wouldn't sell me out." She reached out, grabbing him by the collar of his flight suit, shaking him. "I almost lost you on that battlefield. I watched the light go out of your eyes. I will not watch it happen again." Jace looked down at her. Her face was open, raw with a decade of suppressed grief. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a terrifying magnetic pull. He could feel her breath on his chin. He could smell that storm and flower scent. "Lyra," he breathed. "I have wanted you since the war," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I remember how you held me. I remember your hands on my armor. I remember that you made me laugh when I was bleeding to death." She looked up at him, her golden eyes searching his. "Do you not feel it? Even a little?" Jace felt it. He felt it like a gravity well. His hand moved of its own accord, coming up to cup her face. His thumb traced the glowing mark on her cheekbone. It was warm, vibrant with life. He leaned in. She tilted her head up, her lips parting slightly. The distance between them closed to nothing. He could see the flecks of violet in her golden irises. He could feel the heat of her body radiating against his. It would be so easy to kiss her, to let the physical sensation drown out the mental noise. But then the image of the blurred soldier in the hologram flashed in his mind. The stranger. Jace froze. He pulled back, dropping his hand. "I can't," he whispered. Lyra stood there, lips still parted, vulnerable. "Why?" "Because I don't know who I am," Jace said, his voice ragged. "I look at you and I feel something. God, I feel something huge, but I don't know if it's mine. I don't know if it's real or just muscle memory from a guy who doesn't exist anymore." He backed away, putting the pilot's chair between them. "I can't want you, Lyra. Not until I know who is doing the wanting." Lyra stared at him for a long moment. The light in her skin dimmed, the blue turning to a dull, bruised purple. She nodded slowly, a gesture of painful acceptance. "I understand," she said quietly. She turned and left the bridge. Jace sank into the pilot's chair, putting his head in his hands. The route to the Sarathian capital required them to pass through the Veil, a region of unstable space where the fabric of reality was thin. Navigators called it the graveyard of ghosts. As the gray heron entered the anomaly, the stars outside the viewport stopped looking like stars. They smeared into ribbons of oil-slick color. The darkness of space turned a bruised violet. Jace sat at the controls, his knuckles white. The ship's sensors were going haywire, reporting phantom signals. "Captain," Helix said, sounding concerned, "internal chronometers are desynchronizing. I am detecting temporal echoes." "Keep us steady," Jace muttered. "Just fly through the center." He looked out the window. Suddenly, the glass wasn't showing space. It was showing a sky of burning sulfur. Jace gasped. He saw a dropship roaring toward him. He saw explosions. He saw Lyra. Not the Lyra in the cabin, but the Lyra from the war, screaming a battle cry. He squeezed his eyes shut. It's not real. It's the anomaly. He opened his eyes. The reflection in the glass wasn't him. It was the younger soldier. Blood on his forehead, eyes wild with adrenaline. "Incoming! Get down!" The voice echoed inside the cockpit, loud and clear. Jace gripped the console, hyperventilating. The past wasn't just a memory here, it was leaking into the present. He felt the phantom weight of the Queen on his shoulder. He felt the searing heat of the plasma mortar. "Jace." A hand touched his shoulder. A real hand. He jumped, spinning around. Lyra stood there. She wasn't looking at the window, she was looking at him. "Breathe," she said softly. "I can see it," Jace gasped. "I can see the war. It's right there. It is the Veil," she said. "It reflects your mind back at you. Do not fight it." She took his hand and placed it on her chest, right over her heart. He could feel the strong, rhythmic thrum of it. "Focus on the present," she instructed. "Feel my heartbeat. Match your breathing to mine." She inhaled deeply, a slow, 4-count breath. Jace tried to copy her, his chest hitching. "In," she coached. "Hold. Out." She guided him through the Sarathian meditation. "In. Hold. Out." Slowly, the visions outside the window faded. The burning sky dissolved back into the weird, warped stars of the anomaly. The sounds of battle receded, replaced by the steady hum of the ship's engine. Jace slumped in the chair, exhausted. "Thanks. It is a technique for shock," Lyra said, not letting go of his hand. "We teach it to cadets. It works," Jace said. He looked at her hand covering his. "You are good at this. The keeping me alive part. We take turns," she said. "That is how partners work." The word hung in the air. Partners. It felt right. Better than client. Better than passenger. They sat there in the quiet of the cockpit as the ship drifted out of the anomaly and back into normal space. The tension from the argument was gone, replaced by a fragile, quiet bond. 2 days later, they reached the edge of the Sarathian home system. The direct approach was impossible. The blockade was absolute. Their only chance was a military inspection station orbiting the 6th moon, a checkpoint for supply haulers. "We need disguises," Lyra said, rummaging through Jace's locker. She pulled out a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit for herself and a heavy armored vest for Jace. "You look like a mercenary," she decided, tossing him the vest. A Sarathian-aligned privateer, rough edges, no respect for authority. "I don't have to act much for that," Jace muttered, strapping the armor on. Lyra pulled her hair back and rubbed some engine grease on her glowing markings to dim them. "I will be the courier, low rank, subservient." They docked at the station. The airlock hissed open, revealing a squad of Sarathian guards. They were tall, imposing, and heavily armed. Identification. The lead officer barked. Jace handed over a falsified data pad Helix had cooked up. Transporting biosamples for the Ministry of Science. Highly volatile. Do not shake the box. The officer looked at the pad, then at Jace. You are human. Observant, Jace drawled. Cheaper than a droid. Though, the officer sneered, then turned his gaze to Lyra. She kept her head down, holding the silver case with both hands. And you? The officer asked. Courier third class, Lyra mumbled. Just following orders, sir. The officer narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer to Lyra. Lift your head. Lyra hesitated, then looked up. The officer studied her. You stand with your weight on the balls of your feet, like a combatant, not a courier. He reached for his weapon. Detain them. Check the database for... Jace moved. He didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he slammed his fist into the side of the silver case Lyra was holding. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make a loud thud. Then he grabbed his throat and started choking. Containment breach, Jace gagged, falling to his knees. The seal is broken. It's the viral pathogen, level 5. He pointed at the officer. You broke the seal. You killed us all. Jace started convulsing on the floor, making horrible retching noises. The guards panicked. Sarathians were terrified of biological contamination. Seal the airlock, the officer screamed, backing away. Contagion alert. The guards scrambled back into the station, hitting the emergency seal button. The blast doors slammed shut, locking Jace and Lyra on the dockside right next to their ship. Jace instantly stopped convulsing. He stood up, dusted off his knees, and looked at Lyra. Viral pathogen? Lyra asked, one eyebrow raised. Level 5, Jace said with a grin. Works every time. Let's go. They scrambled back onto the Grey Heron and detached before the guards realized they had been duped. As they broke orbit, the view on the main screen changed. Ahead of them, hanging in the void like a jewel, was Serath Prime. It was breathtaking. The planet was wrapped in rings of silver dust. The surface was a swirl of turquoise oceans and continents of white stone. Even from space, the lights of the capital city shone like a constellation on the ground. Floating high in the atmosphere, tethered by gravity beams, were the crystal citadels, massive, translucent structures that housed the nobility. The Queen's palace sat at the center, a spire of diamond glass piercing the clouds. Lyra stood at the viewport, her hand pressed against the glass. The yearning on her face was painful to watch. Home, she whispered. It's beautiful, Jace admitted. Lyra didn't turn. It is a cage, but it is my cage. She looked at the palace, her expression hardening. If we fail, Jace, if the High General wins, they won't just kill the Queen. They will rewrite history. They will burn the archives. They will erase the truth of the war. They will erase you again. She turned to him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. And this time, there will be no one left to remember. Jace looked at the planet, then at her. He felt the fear, the deep, primal fear of walking into a trap. But he also felt something else, a stubborn, reckless resolve. He stepped up beside her, looking out at the world that wanted him dead. He didn't have his memory. He didn't know the man in the hologram, but he knew the woman standing next to him. And he knew that he wasn't going to let her face this alone. I'm in, Jace said quietly. Lyra looked at him. Truly? Until the end, Jace said. He didn't realize until the words left his mouth that he had said them before. The echo of the phrase vibrated in his mind, familiar and heavy. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. She recognized the vow. Then let us finish it, she said. Jace pushed the throttle forward, and the gray heron began its descent toward the crystal spires. The lower levels of the Cerathian capital were a vertical ocean of neon fog and damp stone. While the crystal spires above caught the sunlight, the Undercity lived in a perpetual bioluminescent twilight. The air here tasted of recycled ozone and spicy street food, thick enough to coat the back of the throat. Jace pulled the collar of his stolen maintenance tunic tight against his neck. He kept his head down, matching Lyra's brisk pace as they wove through the throng of laborers, disgraced merchants, and off-world drifters. "This contact of yours," Jace muttered, checking the perimeter with a nervous glance. "Is he reliable? Or is he going to sell us for a warm meal?" "He owes me a life debt," Lyra said, her voice low. "In Cerathian culture, that is more binding than currency." They turned down a narrow alleyway illuminated by flickering blue signage. A massive banner hung from an overhead walkway, draped like a shroud. It bore the symbol of the serpent, a silver coil strangling a sword. Beneath it, a holographic projection of the High General played on a loop, his voice booming through distorted speakers. "Human treachery is a poison in our veins." The General's voice thundered, "We must purge the weakness from our court. We must return to strength." Jace stopped, staring up at the projection. "He is talking about me, about people like me. He is talking about a ghost," Lyra said, grabbing Jace's arm and pulling him forward. "Do not listen. It is poison." They reached a heavy rusted door at the end of the alley. Lyra knocked, a complex rhythmic pattern against the metal. A slot slid open, revealing a pair of suspicious wide-set eyes. The door groaned open. Inside, the room was cluttered with salvage, stacks of identity chips, old uniform fabrics, and illegal modification tools. An elderly Cerathian with graying scales sat behind a workbench, his hands shaking slightly as he worked on a circuit board. "Torin," Lyra said softly. The old forger looked up. He dropped his tool, his eyes widening. "Lyra, I heard the broadcasts. They say you are a traitor. They say many things," Lyra said, stepping into the light. "I need access to the palace service lifts, 2 passes, level 4 clearance." Torin hesitated, looking from Lyra to Jace. "A human? You bring a human here? To the heart of the fire?" "He is with me," Lyra said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Torin sighed, a rattling sound in his chest. He reached under his desk and pulled out 2 wafer-thin plastic cards. "I made these for a cleaner crew that never showed up. They will get you past the perimeter sensors, but the biometric scanners at the inner sanctum, those I cannot fool." "We will handle the inner sanctum," Lyra said, taking the cards. "Thank you, Torin." The old man grabbed her hand. "Go with the currents, child. But know that the tide is rising against you, armed with the passes and disguised in the drab gray uniforms of palace maintenance staff." Jace and Lyra began the ascent. The service lifts were terrifyingly fast. They shot upward through transparency tubes, leaving the grime of the Undercity behind. The view shifted from dark, crowded alleys to blindingly bright, pristine architecture. The upper capital was a masterpiece of floating islands connected by shimmering hard light bridges. Massive estates drifted in the atmosphere, tethered by gravity beams. The Queen's Palace dominated the skyline, a crown of white stone and diamond glass that seemed to pierce the heavens. "It looks peaceful from up here," Jace said, leaning against the glass of the lift. "It is a facade," Lyra murmured. "The rot is on the inside." The lift slowed, depositing them in a bustling service corridor beneath the main throne hall. Servants scurried back and forth carrying trays of exotic fruits and data slates. Security drones hovered near the ceiling, their red optical sensors sweeping the hallway. Jace felt the sweat trickling down his spine. Act like you belong, he told himself. You are just a guy fixing a hyperspanner. Nothing to see here. Lyra led the way, her posture changing instantly. She slumped her shoulders, shrinking her warrior frame to mimic the submissive gait of a servant. They passed a checkpoint manned by 2 guards in ceremonial armor. Passes. One guard barked, not even looking up from his data pad. Lyra held up her card. Jace followed suit. The reader chirped a green approval. Move along, the guard grunted. The archive's air filtration is acting up again. We are on it, Jace mumbled, keeping his voice rough. They slipped past, turning into a quieter, vaulted hallway lined with statues of past monarchs. The noise of the palace faded, replaced by a heavy, reverent silence. The archives are 3 levels down, Lyra whispered. It is a restricted zone. The High General's personal security will be patrolling. They descended a spiral staircase cut into the living rock of the floating island. The air grew cooler, smelling of old paper and preservation gas. At the bottom of the stairs, a massive blast door blocked the way. There was no keycard slot, only a complex biometric hand scanner. Torrens passes won't work here, Jace said. Lyra stepped up to the scanner. She took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the plate. I never resigned my commission, Jace. I was exiled, but technically, my biosignature was never purged from the royal database, unless the general was thorough. She pressed her hand against the glass. A beam of blue light scanned her palm. The console hummed. Identity confirmed. A synthesized voice announced, Welcome, Lieutenant Lyra, Royal Guard Clearance Alpha. The heavy doors hissed open. Jace let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. You really were one of them. The inner circle. I was her shadow, Lyra said, her voice tinged with sadness. The archive wing was a cavernous space filled with rows of towering data stacks. Holographic particles floated in the air like dust motes. It was a graveyard of history. We need the physical records from the cycle of Dawn Vale, Lyra said, moving quickly down the central aisle. The digital network can be altered, but the hard crystals are read only. They are the only thing the general cannot fake. She stopped at a secure vault marked with the royal seal. This is it. She entered a code on the keypad, a sequence so fast Jace couldn't track it. The vault clicked and slid open. Inside, thousands of crystalline shards were slotted into the walls. Lyra scanned the labels, her eyes darting back and forth. Here, she said, pulling a jagged crimson crystal from the shelf. Operation Dawn Vale, classified level 0. She moved to a playback table in the center of the room and slotted the crystal. The air above the table warped. A high-definition hologram sprang to life, far clearer than the grainy footage they had seen in the Undercity. Jace stepped closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene was chaos, the battlefield, the explosions. He saw himself. There was no blur this time. It was him, 5 years younger, his face grim, shouting orders to a squad that was already dead. He saw Lyra, radiant and terrifying, fighting beside him. Then, the impact, the mortar shell. Jace flinched as he watched Lyra fall in the hologram. He watched his younger self scream her name. He watched himself drag the queen, a terrified, fragile figure in gold robes, and Lyra toward the shuttle. But the recording didn't end there. The scene shifted. It was the interior of a medical frigate. Jace watched his younger self pacing in a small room. He was covered in bandages, his eyes wild with fury. A Cerathian diplomat sat across from him, flanked by 2 armed guards. The weapon was human-made, the diplomat said smoothly. A bio-weave bomb. It was smuggled in a diplomatic pouch carried by your convoy. That is a lie, the on-screen Jace shouted, slamming his fist on the table. My men died defending that convoy. We were set up. It does not matter what is true, the diplomat replied cold. It matters what prevents a war. If the public learns that a human weapon nearly killed the Queen, the Sarathian fleet will burn Earth to ash. Billions will die. So what do you want? Jace asked. We need silence. We need the human element removed from the narrative. The Queen survives. The assassin is unknown. And you disappear. I am not going anywhere, Jace spat. I have a witness. The Royal Guard, Lyra. She knows what happened. The guard Lyra is in critical condition, the diplomat said. If you want her to receive the advanced regeneration therapy she needs to survive, you will cooperate. If you refuse, she dies, and the war begins. Jace watched the color drain from his younger self's face. He watched the defiance break. What do I have to do? On screen, Jace whispered. Sign this. It authorizes a full neural scrub. Selected memories, your identity, your service record. You become a ghost. In exchange, we save the guard, and we spare your species. Jace watched himself pick up the stylus. He watched his hand shake. He watched himself sign his own life away. The hologram flickered and died. Jace stood in the silence of the vault, staring at the empty air. He felt cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. They didn't just take it, he whispered, his voice trembling. I gave it to them. Jace. Lyra reached out, her hand hovering near his shoulder. Don't. Jace stepped back, spinning around to face her. His eyes were burning. You knew. Lyra flinched. I suspected. I did not know the details. I was in a coma for weeks after the battle. When I woke up, you were gone. But you knew I didn't just wander off, Jace shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You knew I was erased. I knew they made you leave, Lyra cried, tears welling in her eyes. I tried to find you, Jace. I spent years searching the databases. I hacked the diplomatic archives. I bribed officials. You didn't look hard enough. I was forbidden. Lyra stepped forward, her anger flaring to match his. The Queen herself ordered me to stop. She told me that your sacrifice was the only thing holding the peace together. If I found you, if I woke you up, I would risk everything you gave up your life to save. So I was just the price of doing business, Jace said, his voice dripping with venom. A human battery you plugged in to save your precious empire, and then threw in the trash when you were done. No. Lyra grabbed his shoulders. You were the man who saved me, and look where it got me. Jace shoved her hands away. I have spent 5 years living in a tin can, wondering why I wake up screaming every night, wondering why I can't remember my mother's face, because I traded it for you. For her. He gestured wildly at the palace around them. I am not a hero, Lyra. I am a victim. I am a pawn you all used to cover up your own mess. Jace, please, I am done, he said, turning away. I am taking this ship and I am leaving. You can fight your own wars. Before Lyra could answer, a siren began to wail. Red lights flashed on the ceiling. Security breach in Sector 4. A mechanical voice blared. Lockdown initiated. They found us, Lyra said, her face paling. The login. It was a trap. They were waiting for my biosignature. Jace looked at the door. We are trapped. Not yet. Lyra grabbed the data crystal. There is a service chute behind the shelves. It leads to the geothermal vents. I don't care, Jace snapped. You can hate me later, Lyra said, grabbing his wrist with a grip like iron. You can hate me for the rest of your life, but right now, you have to run. Move! She dragged him toward the back of the room. They scrambled into a narrow maintenance tunnel just as the blast doors blew inward with a concussive roar. Guards poured into the vault, plasma rifles firing blindly. Jace and Lyra slid down the chute, tumbling through darkness, the heat rising with every meter. They spilled out onto a stone ledge, coughing and bruised. They were in a cavernous natural grotto carved into the cliffs beneath the palace foundation. Steam rose in thick white pillars from geothermal pools. The walls were covered in bioluminescent moss that cast a soft, ethereal teal glow over the water. It was a royal bathing chamber, ancient and disused, hidden from the main complex. Jace groaned, clutching his side. He checked his ribs. Bruised, maybe cracked. Lyra was worse. A plasma graze had scored a line across her ribs, cauterized but angry and red against her blue skin. She leaned against the rock wall, breathing shallowly. "We are safe for a moment," she gasped. "The steam masks our heat signatures." Jace sat on a flat rock, putting his head in his hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the crushing weight of the revelation. He looked up at Lyra. She was trembling, not from fear, he realized, but from pain. "You are hurt," he said. "It is nothing." "Sit down," Jace ordered. His voice was flat, drained of anger, leaving only exhaustion. Lyra slid down the wall to sit on the damp stone floor. Jace knelt beside her. He ripped a strip of cloth from his tunic and dipped it in the cool water of a nearby pool. He reached out to clean the wound on her side. His hands were shaking. "I am sorry," Lyra whispered, looking at his hands. Jace paused. He didn't look at her face. He focused on the wound. "Sorry for what? That I saved you? Or that you let me do it? That I was not worth the cost?" she said. Jace stopped. He looked up. Lyra was crying, silent. Silver tears tracked down her cheeks, glowing faintly in the dim light. "I woke up and you were gone," she said, her voice breaking. "I felt hollow, like half of my soul had been cut away. I asked the Queen every day where you were. She told me I had to let you go, that if I loved you, I would let you stay forgotten, because remembering would kill you." She reached out, her cool fingers covering his hand on her ribs. "I was afraid, Jace. I was afraid that if I found you, you would look at me and see only the pain, that you would hate me." Jace looked at her. He saw the warrior who had taken on a cruiser with a manual turret. He saw the arrogant royal guard who lifted engine crates. And he saw the terrified woman who had spent 5 years mourning a man who wasn't dead. He thought about the hologram. He thought about the younger Jace signing that paper. "If you refuse, she dies." It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a choice. His choice. "I didn't do it for the Empire," Jace said softly. Lyra looked at him, confused. "I watched the tape. Lyra, I didn't sign that paper to save the peace. I signed it to get you into the Regen tank." He moved his hand from her wound to her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. "I did it for you." Lyra let out a sob, a small, wounded sound. "Jace." The anger in his chest broke, dissolving into something else, something hot and urgent. He leaned in. Lyra met him halfway. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was a collision of two people who had been starving for years. Jace tasted the salt of her tears and the electric tang of her skin. Lyra's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if she could merge their physical forms and bridge the gap in his memory. They slid down to the floor, the steam wrapping around them like a veil. The cold stone was hard beneath them, but neither noticed. Jace felt the phantom memories surging again, not visual this time, but tactile. He knew the curve of her spine. He knew the sound she made in the back of her throat when he kissed the sensitive skin below her ear. His body remembered her perfectly. "I am scared," Lyra whispered against his mouth, her hands gripping his shoulders. "Of what?" Jace murmured, pressing a kiss to her throat. "That they will take this too," she said. "That tomorrow you will look at me and I will be a stranger again." "Then we make it count," Jace said fiercely. "We make it so loud they can't silence it." He kissed her again, silencing her fear. The bioluminescent moss on the walls seemed to pulse in time with their movements, casting shifting shadows over their skin. In the hidden dark of the palace that wanted them dead, they reclaimed the intimacy that had been stolen from them. It was a frantic, tender, and absolute declaration that they were still here, that they had survived. An hour later, the silence in the grotto was heavy and peaceful. Jace lay on his back, staring up at the glowing stalactites. Lyra lay with her head on his chest, her breathing even. Her skin was still glowing faintly, the bioluminescence casting a soft blue light over Jace's arm. Jace closed his eyes. The white fog in his mind was thinning. He could hear it now, the sound of her laugh from before the war. He could feel the vibration of the shuttle floor under his boots. He could see the way she looked at him across a crowded mess hall, a secret shared in a glance. "It's coming back," he whispered. Not all at once, but in pieces. Lyra shifted, tracing a pattern on his chest with her finger. "Do not force it. It hurts less if you let it drift in." Jace tightened his arm around her. "I remember you singing." Lyra stiffened. "I do not sing. I am a guard." "You hummed. When you were cleaning your weapon. Some sad old tune." Lyra was silent for a long moment. "It was a lullaby from my home province. My mother taught it to me." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. Her expression was solemn. "Jace," she said, "you need to understand what happens next. We get out of here," Jace said. "We broadcast the evidence. We clear our names." "It will not be that simple," she said. "Now that we have the crystal, we are the most dangerous people in the galaxy. The general will not try to arrest us anymore. He will burn the entire capital to turn us to ash." "Let him try," Jace said. Lyra shook her head. "You have your memory fragments, but you do not remember the politics." "Sail." "My commander. She taught me everything I know. She knows how I think. She knows where I will run." "Then we do what she doesn't expect," Jace said. Sitting up, we stop running. He stood, pulling Lyra up with him. He winced as his ribs protested, but the pain felt distant now. He had a focus. He had a reason. "We need to get to the broadcast tower in the upper spire," Jace said. "No," Lyra corrected. "The upper spire is locked down. We have to go through the royal ventilation grid. It exits near the maintenance docks. We can get a pod." She picked up her tunic, wincing as she pulled it over her wounded side. "Are you ready?" she asked. Jace picked up the data crystal and shoved it into his pocket. "I was born ready," he said. Then he paused. "Actually, I was reborn about an hour ago. So I'm fresh." Lyra smiled, a true, brilliant smile that transformed her face. "Let's go. Human." They moved through the shadows of the bathing chamber toward the exit tunnel. The air grew cooler as they moved away from the geothermal vents. They reached the heavy iron door that led back to the maintenance corridors. Lyra pressed her ear against it. "Silence," she whispered. She keyed the release. The door hissed open. They stepped out into the hallway. and found themselves staring down the barrels of a dozen pulse rifles. Standing in the center of the formation was a tall, imposing Sarathian woman with silver armor and a scarred eye, Commander Sale. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. "Hello." "Lyra," Sale said smoothly. "I knew you would choose the old bathhouse. You always were sentimental." Lyra froze, her hand hovering near her empty holster. "Commander?" Sale stepped forward, her boots clicking on the stone floor. "You have caused quite a mess. Lieutenant, the High General is furious. He wants to vaporize this entire sector just to be sure you are dead." "But?" Lyra asked, her body coiled like a spring. "But I convinced him that you are a valuable asset who has been misled by a human parasite," Sale said, her gaze flickering to Jace with utter contempt. "Give me the crystal. Lyra, renounce the human. Testify that he kidnapped you, and you can come home." Lyra stared at her mentor. "You are working with the serpent. You betrayed the queen. The queen is weak," Sale snapped. "The empire is crumbling and we need strength. Lyra, we need order. I am offering you a place at the high table. Do not throw it away for a smuggler." Lyra looked at Jace. Then she looked back at Sale. "He is not a smuggler," she said, her voice ringing clear and cold in the hallway. "He is the hero of Dawnvale, and he has more honor in his spilled blood than you have in your entire bloodline." Sale's expression hardened. "Pity." She raised her hand. "Kill the human. Secure the girl. Fire." Jace didn't wait. He grabbed a steam pipe running along the wall and yanked it with all his strength. The pipe burst. A jet of scalding white steam exploded into the hallway, filling the corridor with blinding fog. "Run!" Jace screamed, grabbing Lyra's hand. Plasma bolts sizzled through the steam, burning the air around them. Jace felt a searing pain in his thigh, a glancing hit, but he didn't stop. They sprinted blindly down the corridor, turning corners at random. "They are hurting us!" Lyra yelled over the roar of the steam. "The maintenance pod!" Jace gasped, limping heavily. "Where is it?" "Left!" They rounded a corner and saw the airlock for the emergency disposal pods. Jace slammed his fist onto the release panel. The door cycled open. Jace threw Lyra inside. He scrambled in after her just as Sale emerged from the fog. Her weapon raised. She fired. The bolt hit the control panel on the outside of the pod, fusing the circuits. The door slammed shut. The launch sequence triggered automatically. With a bone-jarring lurch, the pod was ejected from the side of the floating island. They plummeted into the open air. The pod tumbled, spinning wildly as it fell toward the undercity below. Jace grabbed the restraints, pinning Lyra to the seat as the G-forces slammed into them. Through the viewport, he saw the palace receding, a beautiful, deadly jewel in the sky. "We are going to crash!" Lyra shouted, her hands flying over the manual controls. "I've got it!" Jace gritted his teeth, fighting the spin. Thrusters to maximum. He slammed the lever forward. The retro rockets fired, screaming in protest. The pod slowed, but not enough. "Brace for impact." The pod smashed through a neon billboard, shattering glass and metal, before crashing into a pile of refuse in a lower-level alleyway. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of cooling engines and the distant wail of sirens. Jace unbuckled his harness, falling to the floor of the pod. His leg was burning. His ribs were on fire. "Lyra," he croaked, "I am here." She crawled over to him, coughing in the smoke. "We are alive." Jace looked at the data crystal, still safe in his pocket. "We have the truth," he wheezed. "Now we just have to survive long enough to tell it," Lyra said, helping him up. She kicked the hatch open. The smell of the undercity, garbage and ozone flooded in. It smelled like freedom, and it smelled like war. The descent into the Undercity was not a journey. It was a fall. The maintenance pod had sheared through 3 levels of industrial awnings before crunching into a heap of refuse in Sector 12. Jace and Lyra had crawled out of the wreckage, coughing up acrid smoke, and limped into the shadows just seconds before the security drones swarmed the crash site. Now, 2 days later, they were ghosts haunting the bottom of the world. Sector 12 was a neon-drenched nightmare of overcrowding and perpetual twilight. Here, the sunlight of the upper capital never reached. The sky was a ceiling of leaking pipes and heavy plasteel foundations that dripped condensation like oily rain. The air tasted of fried grease, ozone, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Jace leaned against a graffiti-stained wall, pulling the collar of his stolen coat tight against his neck. His leg, injured in the escape, throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, but he ignored it. He was watching the street. Crowds of the desperate and the forgotten surged past, Sarathians with dull scales, humans in ragged flight suits, and species Jace couldn't even name, all hawking scavenged tech or illicit substances. "We are clear," Lyra's voice came from beside him. She was huddled under a heavy hood, her bioluminescence dimmed to a faint, sickly gray. They moved deeper into the warren of alleyways until they reached a building that looked like it was held together by rust and optimism. The sign above the door flickered in erratic bursts. The Broken Spire Hostel. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of herbal tea and old dust. The proprietor, an elderly Sarathian female named Vani, sat behind a caged counter. Her scales were the color of ash, and one of her eyes was a milky white orb of blindness. But she smiled when they entered. "You are late for curfew," she croaked, her voice sounding like grinding stones. "I was about to rent your room to a family of high rats. We ran into a patrol," Jace said, limping toward the stairs. "Had to take the long way around." Vanny leaned forward, squinting with her good eye. "You two fight like wildcats, but you stick together like magnets. It warms my old heart." "We are not," Jace started, but Lyra cut him off with a sharp elbow to the ribs. "We are tired, Vanny," Lyra said softly. "Just tired," Vanny chuckled, a rasping sound. "Young love, always so dramatic. Just try not to break the bed. It is an antique." Jace gritted his teeth and followed Lyra up the narrow, creaking staircase. The room Vanny had given them was a closet with aspirations. It contained a single, lumpy mattress, a cracked wash basin, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was intimate. It was claustrophobic. And given the current state of their relationship, it was torture. Lyra tossed her cloak onto a hook and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence between them was heavier than the humid air outside. Since the revelation in the vault, since Jace had learned that his erasure was a negotiated peace treaty signed by his own hand, the dynamic had shifted. The heat of their night in the bathing chamber had cooled into a brittle, jagged tension. "You are pacing again," Lyra said, not looking up. "You are vibrating the floorboards." "I am not pacing," Jace snapped, pivoting on his good leg. "I am thinking, you are angry. I have a right to be angry." "Lyra!" Jace stopped, leaning against the doorframe because the room wasn't wide enough for him to stand anywhere else without touching her knees. "We are stuck in a hole in the ground, eating nutrient paste, while the people who scrambled my brain are sitting in crystal palaces drinking wine." "We have the evidence," Lyra said, touching the pocket where the data crystal was hidden. "We just need to find a way to broadcast it." "And then what?" Jace asked, his voice dripping with cynicism. "The Queen gives me a medal? Maybe a nice pension?" Or maybe she just decides I am inconvenient again and finishes the job this time. She would not do that. You don't know that. You didn't know she ordered the wipe in the first place. You are blind to her. Lyra, you see a saint. I see a politician who traded a human life for a ceasefire. Lyra stood up, her golden eyes flashing. She traded one life to save billions, including yours. Do you think she wanted to do it? I don't care what she wanted, Jace yelled, the sound echoing in the tiny room. Somewhere downstairs, someone banged on the ceiling with a broom handle. Jace lowered his voice to a hiss. I care that I woke up 5 years later with a hole in my head. I care that I look in the mirror and don't know the guy staring back. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. I am not a hero. Lyra, I am collateral damage, and I am tired of bleeding for people who treat me like a spare part. Lyra looked at him, her expression crumbling from anger into a helpless sorrow. She reached out as if to touch his arm, then pulled back. I know, she whispered. I know it is unfair, but right now we are the only thing standing between the galaxy and the High General. Duty, Jace scoffed. Always duty with you. It is not just duty, she said softly. It is survival. She turned to the small holographic newsfeed emitter sitting on the wash basin and flicked it on. The grainy blue light flooded the room. The image of a Serpent faction news anchor filled the air. His face grave. Breaking news from the palace, the anchor announced. Her Majesty the Queen has fallen into a critical state. Royal physicians report a resurgence of the pathogen, a biological agent believed to be of human origin. Jace froze. He looked at the screen. In light of the crisis, the anchor continued. The High Council has invoked Article 99. Emergency executive powers have been temporarily transferred to High General Krell. All human travel visas are suspended immediately. A curfew is in effect. They are doing it, Lyra breathed, horror dawning on her face. They are using the bioweapon on her, just like they planned. Jace watched the screen, his stomach churning. He saw footage of soldiers in serpent-marked armor marching through the streets of the upper city. He saw humans being dragged out of their homes. It is a purge, Jace said. They are killing her. Jace, Lyra said, turning to him. The symptoms they described. The cellular degradation. It is the same weapon the assassin used at Dawn Vale. It is slow, painful. So the general kills the queen, blames it on humans, and takes the throne to save the empire. Jace summarized bleakly. It is a neat little package. We have to move, Lyra said, grabbing her cloak. If she dies, the truth dies with her. Jace didn't move. He stood by the door, his arms crossed. Jace, why should I save her? He asked quietly. Lyra stopped dead. What? Give me one good reason, Lyra. She erased me. She ruined my life. Why should I risk my neck to save the woman who stole my past? Because she is innocent, Lyra cried. She is complicit. Because I am asking you to. Lyra stepped into his space, her hands gripping his shirt. Not the queen. Me. I am asking you. Jace looked down at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes. He saw the woman he had held in the steam-filled grotto, the woman who had made him feel, for a few hours, like he was whole. But the bitterness was too deep. The scar was too fresh. That is not fair, he said, his voice rough. You can't use us to guilt me into this. I am not using us, Lyra said, her voice trembling. I am trusting us. A chime sounded from Lyra's wristcom. It was a high-frequency alert, cutting through the tension. Lyra looked at the device, her eyes widening. It is a royal priority channel. How? Jace asked. It is my old code, she said. The one they think is deactivated. She pressed a button. A holographic projection flickered into existence between them. It was the Queen. She looked nothing like the radiant monarch Jace remembered from the battle footage. She was lying in a medical bed, her skin pale and translucent, the glowing markings on her face dimmed to a faint, sickly white. She was breathing with difficulty. "Lyra," the Queen whispered, her voice distorted by static. "If you are receiving this, then I have failed." Lyra fell to her knees in front of the hologram, her hand reaching out to the insubstantial light. "My Queen." "The General has made his move," the Queen rasped. "The poison. It is in my blood. I do not have much time." The Queen's eyes, clouded with pain, seemed to look through the camera, straight at Jace. "And to the human," she said, "to Jace." Jace stiffened, his back against the door. "I do not ask for your forgiveness," the Queen said. "I have no right to it. I stole your history. I stole your name. I did it to prevent a war that would have consumed both our worlds, but that does not make it right. It only makes it necessary. I have carried the weight of your silence every day for 5 years." She coughed, a violent spasm that shook the image. "But now," she continued, wiping blue blood from her lip, "I beg you. Not for me, but for the millions who will die if the General succeeds. Exposure is the only weapon we have left. The records, you must show them the truth, even the parts that shame me." The image flickered. "Lyra, my loyal shadow. I am sorry, I should have let you love him." The transmission cut out. The room plunged back into the gloom of the undercity twilight. Lyra stayed on her knees for a long moment, her head bowed. When she looked up, her face was wet with tears. She stood up slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her expression hardened into something brittle and sharp. "We have to go to the broadcast tower," she said. "It is the only transmitter strong enough to override the General's blackout." Jace stared at the empty space where the hologram had been. He felt hollowed out. The apology didn't fix anything. It just made the anger more confusing. It was easier to hate a monster than a dying woman making impossible choices. "She admits it," Jace said, his voice flat. "She admits she sacrificed me, and she is dying for it," Lyra said. "Is that not enough for you?" "No." Jace pushed off the door, pacing the 3 steps the room allowed. "It doesn't give me back my 5 years, Lyra. It doesn't give me back my family, or my friends, or whatever life I had before I woke up on that junk freighter." He spun on her. "And you stand there and defend her, even now." "I defend the future," Lyra shouted. "You defend the institution," Jace countered. "You are a soldier, Lyra. You follow orders. That is all you know. That is a lie, is it?" Jace laughed bitterly. "Look at us. You dragged me into this. You seduced me into this." Lyra recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Seduced? Admit it," Jace said, the words spilling out of him, toxic and defensive. "You needed a bodyguard, you needed a pilot, and you needed the one guy in the galaxy stupid enough to follow you because he had a gap in his brain where his survival instinct should be." "Stop it," Lyra warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What was last night?" "Lyra?" Jace asked, stepping closer, looming over her. "Was that real? Or was that just another way to secure the asset? Just a little morale boost for the human weapon?" Lyra stared at him. The hurt in her eyes was absolute. It was a physical thing, cracking the air between them. "You know that is not true," she whispered. "Do I?" Jace asked. "I don't remember who I am." "Lyra. Maybe I am just a broken soldier clinging to the first pretty thing that looked at me. Maybe you are just lonely and guilt. That's not love. That's trauma. The silence that followed was total. Lyra took a step back. She looked at him for a long, agonizing second, as if she were memorizing his face one last time. Then she reached for her cloak. "You are right, Jace," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are broken, but not because of what they took from your mind. You are broken because you are too afraid to stand for anything real." She pulled the hood up, obscuring her face. "I will take the crystal," she said. "Stay here. Stay safe in your hole. I will finish this alone." She opened the door and walked out. Jace stood there. He wanted to call her back. He wanted to run after her. But his pride, his anger, and his fear nailed his feet to the floor. He listened to her footsteps fade down the stairs. Then the front door slammed, and he was alone. 2 hours later. Jace was sitting on the floor of the room staring at a bottle of cheap synthetic spirits he had bought from Vani. He hadn't opened it. He felt sick. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, gray ash of regret. He replayed his words, just a way to secure the asset. He was an idiot. He was a coward. A knock came at the door. "Go away," Jace growled. The door opened anyway. Vani stood there, leaning on a cane made of scrap pipe. She tapped her way into the room and sat on the edge of the mattress. "She is gone," the old woman said. "I know. She took the heavy weaponry, but she left her rations," Vani noted. "She does not expect to come back." Jace flinched. "She is a royal guard. She can handle herself." Vani tapped her cane on the floor. "I was a royal guard once. Did you know that?" Jace looked up, surprised. "You? A long time ago. Before the Great War." Vani touched her blind eye. "I lost my sight defending a bridge against a separatist battalion. My unit retreated. They left me behind." Jace looked at the old woman with new respect. "I'm sorry. I survived," Vani said. "I crawled through the mud for 3 days. When I got back to the capital, they gave me a medal and a discharge. They said I was a hero, and then they forgot me." "Sounds familiar," Jace muttered. "I was angry for 10 years, Vani said. I drank. I fought. I cursed the Queen and the Empire. I felt used, just like you. What changed? I realized that my anger was a cage," Vani said. She turned her blind face toward him. "They used me. Yes. But that did not change what I did on that bridge. I saved 1,000 civilians that day. They didn't order me to do that. I chose to hold the line." She leaned forward. "Being used doesn't erase the good you did. Human. It just means you have to decide who owns your actions now. Them. Or you." Jace looked at his hands. He thought about the hologram in the vault, the way he had dragged Lyra and the Queen to the shuttle. He hadn't done that because of orders. He had done it because that was who he was. Memory or no memory. He was a man who saved people. And right now, the person he wanted to save most was walking into a death trap. "She went to the broadcast spire in Sector 4, Jace said, standing up. "That is a suicide run," Vani said. "The general has that sector locked down." "I know." Jace grabbed his jacket. He checked his stun blaster. It was fully charged. He looked at Vani. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am an old woman who likes happy endings." Vani smiled, revealing a row of sharp teeth. "And because she left this for you." Vani reached into her robes and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Jace took it. It was real paper, rare and expensive. He unfolded it. It was a sketch, charcoal on paper. It showed a man sleeping, his face relaxed, younger. The lines were loving and precise. Underneath, in elegant Sarathian script, it read, "I remember." Jace felt a crack in his chest, wide and painful. He shoved the paper into his pocket, right next to his heart. "Thanks. Vani." "Go," the old woman said, "and try not to die. It is bad for business." The rain in Sector 4 was acid-heavy, stinging Jace's face as he sprinted across the rooftops. He had hacked into the city's traffic grid, using his smuggler's toolkit to bypass the lockdown protocols. He moved like a shadow, leaping gaps between crumbling tenements. His eyes fixed on the towering metal spine of the planetary broadcast spire. It pierced the undercity ceiling, reaching up toward the royal levels. It was a fortress of steel and data, and it was swarming with troops. Jace slid to a halt behind a ventilation unit, peering through his electro-binoculars. At the base of the tower, a perimeter had been established. Heavy assault droids patrolled the gate, but the real action was on the upper gantry, a rusty platform halfway up the spire. He zoomed in. Lyra was there. She was pinned down behind a data junction box. Plasma fire rained down on her position from 3 sides. She was returning fire, her energy pike flashing, but she was outgunned. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to reach the interface panel on the central column. She was trying to upload the truth. Jace scanned the attackers. He saw the silver armor of the Serpent faction elite, and in the center, directing the fire, was Commander Sale. "She is going to get killed," Jace whispered. He checked his weapon. He had a stun blaster and a vibro knife. Against a squad of elites, the math was bad. He needed a distraction. He looked at the massive power conduit running along the roof of the building next to the tower. It fed the neon signage for the entire block. "Sorry, neighbors," Jace muttered. He pulled out his multi-tool and jammed it into the junction box. He overloaded the capacitor. Boom! A massive explosion of sparks erupted, blowing out the transformer. The entire city block went dark. The neon signs died. The streetlights failed. Confusion rippled through the soldiers below. Jace moved. He rappelled down the side of the building, swinging across the gap to the broadcast tower's maintenance ladder. He climbed fast, ignoring the burning in his leg. He reached the gantry level just as the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the platform in a rotating red glare. "Lyra!" Jace shouted, vaulting over the railing. Lyra turned, shock registering on her face. "Jace, go back!" Before he could reach her, a spotlight blinded him. "Hold fire!" Commander Sale's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Jace squinted. Sale stood on the platform above them, flanked by 4 snipers. Their laser sights were all trained on Lyra's chest, but they weren't just aiming at her. Sale pointed a heavy cannon toward the structure below the tower, a crowded refugee housing block. "Surrender, Lieutenant," Sale shouted, "or I drop this entire tower on the civilians below." Lyra froze. She looked at the interface panel, inches away. She could upload the data, but in the time it took, Sale would fire. She looked down at the housing block. She could see faces in the windows. Families. Children. Lyra lowered her weapon. "No!" Jace yelled, stepping forward. "Don't do it, Lyra!" Lyra looked at him. Her eyes were sad but clear. "I cannot let them die, Jace," she said softly. "That is the job." She dropped her energy pike. It clattered on the metal grating. "I surrender!" Lyra shouted. Sale smiled, a cold, victorious expression. "Secure her." Guards rushed forward, tackling Lyra. They slammed her against the railing, cuffing her hands with energy binders. Jace stood in the shadows of the maintenance machinery, his blaster raised, but he couldn't fire. If he shot, Sale would destroy the Foundation. He was helpless. He watched them drag her away. He saw Sale lean in and whisper something in Lyra's ear, then strike her across the face with the back of her gauntlet. Lyra's head snapped back, blue blood flying, but she didn't cry out. They dragged her into a waiting transport skiff. Sale looked around the platform. Find the human. He must be close. Jace pressed himself into the dark recess of a turbine intake. He held his breath. The guards swept the area, but the darkness and the rain covered him. After a few minutes, Sale grew impatient. "Leave him," she barked. "He is nothing without her. We have the traitor. The execution is scheduled for dawn." The skiff lifted off, roaring upward toward the palace. Jace was left alone on the rain-slicked gantry. He walked to where Lyra had been standing. He picked up her energy pike. It was heavy, humming with residual power. He looked up at the palace. It glowed in the distance, a beacon of corruption. He could run. He could take the gray heron and disappear into the frontier. He could live a long, quiet life and never look back. He closed his hand around the grip of the pike. He remembered Vani's words. Decide who owns your actions. He remembered the sketch in his pocket. I remember. Jace activated the pike. The blade snapped into existence, a crackling arc of blue plasma. No more running, he said to the rain. He wasn't a pawn. He wasn't a victim. He was Jace. And he was going to burn their whole damn palace down to get her back. He turned and headed for the maintenance lift. He had a team to assemble, and he had a war to finish. The Sarathian capital was no longer a city of light. It was a cage of noise and fear. Sirens wailed in a discordant harmony that vibrated the very bones of the Undercity. Above, in the glittering heights of the royal district, immense holographic projectors had turned the sky into a wall of propaganda. The face of the High General loomed over the population, his expression grave, his voice booming like thunder across the floating islands. "The Queen has fallen," the general announced, his voice looped on every channel. "The human infection has taken her mind. She is terminally compromised. For the safety of the Empire, martial law is in effect, down in the shadows of Sector 12. Jace watched the broadcast on a cracked monitor in the back of a mechanic shop. He adjusted the strap of his stolen pulse rifle. "She is not dead yet," Jace said, his voice low and dangerous. "He is rushing the timeline." Around him stood the most pathetic excuses for a strike team the galaxy had ever seen. There was Kale, a disgraced former palace guard who had been dishonorably discharged for punching a noble who mistreated a servant. He was massive, covered in gray scales, and smelled of engine grease. There was Rix, a nervous, twitchy hacker with cybernetic implants in his fingers that looked like they had been installed with a rusty spoon. And there was Zane, a human street kid no older than 16, who controlled a swarm of jury-rigged surveillance drones with a headset taped together with insulation wire. "This is suicide," Rix muttered, his metal fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on his datapad. "Entering the palace during a code black lockdown? We will be vaporized before we hit the perimeter." "We are not hitting the perimeter," Jace said, turning to face them. "We are going under it." Zane popped a bubble of gum. "The sewers? Gross. Classic, but gross. Maintenance shafts," Jace corrected. "The ventilation grid?" Kale grunted, crossing arms the size of tree trunks. "Those shafts are heavily censored, and they are small. I will get stuck." "You won't," Jace said confidently. "Because Zane's drones are going to loop the sensor feed, and Rix is going to cycle the pressure valves to widen the ducts." "And what do we get out of this?" Rix asked, sweating. "If we die, we don't get paid." "If we win," Jace said, leaning in, "you get a full royal pardon. I will make sure the Queen herself signs it. You want to stop hiding in the dark? This is the ticket out." The three outcasts looked at each other. They were the debris of the Empire, ignored, discarded, and hungry for redemption. Kale picked up a heavy warhammer made from a drive shaft. I have always wanted to hit a high general. Then let's go, Jace said. We have a traitor to catch. The infiltration was a nightmare of claustrophobia and timing. They accessed the ventilation grid through a disposal chute in the mid-city. The shafts were slick with condensation and hummed with the vibration of the massive atmospheric scrubbers. Zane took point. His eyes glazed over as he viewed the world through his drone feeds. "Drone 1 says clear," Zane whispered, his voice echoing in the metal tube. 2 guards at the next junction. They looked bored. Jace crawled forward. He moved differently now. Before, his body had reacted with muscle memory he didn't understand. Now, he moved with purpose. He knew exactly how to silence his breathing. He knew the optimal angle to hold his knife. "Rix, kill the audio sensors in Sector 4, Jace commanded. "Done," Rix whispered from behind. "But I can only hold the loop for 30 seconds. Go." Jace dropped from the vent, landing silently behind the 2 guards. Before they could turn, he struck 2 precise chops to the nerve clusters at the base of their necks. They crumpled without a sound. Kale dropped down next, the floor shuddering under his weight. "Nice. Tie them up," Jace ordered. "We are not killing grunts. They are just following orders." They moved deeper into the palace. The architecture shifted from industrial steel to white marble and gold filigree. They were in the belly of the beast. According to the schematic, the detention wing is 3 levels up, Jace said, checking his wrist comp. They are holding Lyra in the high-security block. Zane gasped. "Whoa, I have got movement. Big movement. What is it?" "They are moving the prisoner," Zane said. "They are taking her to the medical bay for a health inspection." Jace's blood ran cold. A health inspection in a serpent-controlled prison was code for execution by medical malpractice. "We have to move faster," Jace said. "Kale, you are up." They reached the service elevator that led to the medical wing. It was guarded by 4 elite serpent troopers. Kale stepped out of the shadows, roaring a challenge that shook the dust from the ceiling. He swung his massive hammer, knocking 2 troopers into the wall before they could raise their weapons. Jace and the others surged forward. The firefight was short and brutal. Jace moved through the chaos like a wraith, his stun blaster dropping targets with clinical efficiency. "Clear," Jace shouted. They overrode the elevator controls and shot upward. When the doors opened on the medical level, they walked into a scene of sterile horror. Lyra was strapped to a vertical biobed in the center of the room. She looked terrible. Her face was bruised, her lips split, and her bioluminescence was dim and flickering. A medical droid hovered over her with a syringe filled with a glowing green liquid. Standing watch were 2 officers and a tech specialist. "Get away from her," Jace yelled, leveling his rifle. The officers turned, stunned by the intrusion. Kale didn't give them time to think. He charged, using his bulk to shield the team. Jace sprinted for the biobed. He shot the medical droid out of the air, sending it crashing into a shelf of instruments. He reached Lyra, grabbing the restraints. Lyra's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, dazed. "You," she whispered, her voice a cracked rasp. "You are supposed to be running." "I am done running," Jace said, his hands flying over the locking mechanism. "Rix, get this open." Rix ran over, jacking his cyber fingers into the bed's console. "I am trying. It is a kinetic lock." Jace looked at Lyra. Her golden eyes were filled with pain, but also a stubborn, fierce light. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "You were safe." "I was alone," Jace said. He stopped working on the lock for a second to cup her face in his hands. "I was wrong. Lyra, I said I was afraid of being used. I was just afraid of losing you again. Lyra leaned into his touch. You remembered? Not everything, Jace admitted. But enough. I know that I choose this. I choose the fight. And I choose you. The lock beeped and hissed open. Restraints disengaged, Rix yelled. Lyra fell forward and Jace caught her. She groaned, her legs weak, but she wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. For a moment, the battle around them faded. Jace held her tight, feeling the erratic beat of her heart against his chest. Can you stand? Jace asked. Lyra pulled back. She looked at him, then at the ragtag team guarding the door. She wiped the blood from her lip and straightened her spine. Her bioluminescence flared, brightening from a sickly gray to a defiant azure. Give me a weapon, she said. Jace handed her a spare pistol. That is my girl. We need to get to the Queen, Lyra said, checking the charge on the weapon. The general is going to force a succession ceremony in the throne hall within the hour. Then we crash the party, Jace said. The run to the royal chambers was a gauntlet. The palace was on high alert. Alarms blared, bathing the white corridors in pulsing red light. Zane's drones buzzed ahead, drawing fire and creating distractions. Kale acted as a battering ram, smashing through barricades. Rick scrambled door locks, sealing reinforcements in side corridors. They reached the heavy double doors of the Queen's private sanctuary. The royal guard stationed there had been replaced by serpent elites. This is it, Lyra said. Sale will have her best men inside. On 3, Jace said. 1, 2, 3. They breached the room. The battle was frantic. Jace and Lyra fought back to back, a whirlwind of plasma and kinetic force. They moved with a synchronization that defied the years they had spent apart. When Jace ducked, Lyra fired over his head. When Lyra reloaded, Jace covered her angle. They cleared the room. In the center, on a massive bed surrounded by life support machinery, lay the alien queen. She was conscious, but barely. Her skin was gray, the veins standing out in stark black lines against her pallor. Majesty, Lyra cried, rushing to her side. The queen turned her head. Her eyes were clouded, but she smiled weakly. My shadow returns, and she brings the ghost. Jace approached the bed. He felt a strange mix of anger and reverence. This was the woman who had erased him, but she was also the woman he had saved. We are here, Jace said. The general says you are dead. We are going to prove him wrong. There is little time, the queen whispered. The poison. It binds to the DNA. It cannot be reversed. Lyra let out a choked sob. No. But the truth can survive, the queen said. She looked at Jace. Come closer. Human. Jace stepped up to the bedside. You struggle, the queen said. Your mind is a fractured mirror. You need to see, to truly know. She raised a trembling hand. In her palm lay a small, crystalline device, a neural lattice. It pulsed with a soft, white light. This was what we took, she said. I kept it. I could not destroy a hero's soul. I only hid it. She held it out to him. Take it back. Jace looked at the crystal. It was his past. It was the pain, the war, the loss, and it was the love. He looked at Lyra. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jace took the crystal. He pressed it to his temple. Snap! The world dissolved into white fire. The smell of burning sulfur filled his nose. He was back on Vorgos 4. The sky was bleeding violet. Jace was screaming orders, his throat raw. He fired his rifle until it clicked dry, then used it as a club to smash the carapace of an assassin droid. Lyra was beside him, a blur of blue and gold. She was laughing, a wild, terrified, beautiful sound. "They keep coming," she yelled. "Let them come!" Jace roared back. Then the mortar hit. Jace saw it in slow motion. The explosion lifting Lyra off her feet, the queen falling. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the political consequences. He moved. He threw himself over them. He felt the shrapnel tear into his back armor. He felt the heat sear his skin. He grabbed Lyra by her harness. He grabbed the queen by her robes. "You both leave this battlefield alive," Jace screamed, dragging them through the mud. "That is an order." He got them to the shuttle. He shoved them inside. Lyra grabbed his hand. Her blood was slick on his fingers. She pulled him down, her golden eyes burning into his. "If you ever see me again, you'd better remember me." "Human," she whispered, fierce and desperate. "I will never forget you," Jace promised. Then the whiteout. Jace gasped, falling to his knees on the floor of the queen's chamber. The crystal in his hand turned to dust. The headache was gone. The fog was gone. He looked up. The room was sharp, clear. He looked at Lyra. He didn't just see the woman he had met in the bar. He saw the recruit he had taught to play poker. He saw the warrior who had saved his life a dozen times. He saw the partner he had loved in the quiet moments between battles. "Jace?" Lyra whispered, stepping toward him. Jace stood up. He felt whole. For the first time in 5 years. The silence in his head was filled with music. He looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. "Do you remember me? Human?" Lyra asked softly, repeating the words she had said in the medbay. The words she had carried for 5 years. Years ago. "I saved the alien queen's life in battle." Jace smiled, and it was a smile that reached all the way to his soul. "I remember everything," he said. He pulled her into a kiss that tasted of salt and victory. It was a promise kept. The queen coughed, breaking the moment, touching. She wheezed. "But the revolution waits." "Right," Jace said, wiping his eyes. He turned to Rix, who was hiding behind a curtain. "Rix, get over here. Can you interface with the planetary broadcast from this console?" Rix looked at the massive royal computer bank. I think so. But I need an override code." The queen placed her hand on the scanner panel. Authorization. Alpha. 0. 1. The console hummed to life. "Upload the crystal," Lyra ordered, handing Rix the data drive they had stolen from the vault. "Upload everything. The war records, the bioweapon schematics, the general's treason." Rix's fingers flew. "I am bypassing the censorship algorithm. Slicing the firewall. We are live in 5, 4, outside, in the great plazas of the capital." The giant holographic screens flickered. The image of the High General, who was mid-speech about the human plague, distorted. Static tore through the image. Then, a new video appeared. It was the unedited footage of Dawn Vale. The citizens of the capital stopped. Soldiers in the streets looked up. They saw a human saving their queen. They saw Lyra fighting beside him. Then documents flooded the screen. Orders signed by the High General authorizing the use of bioweapons on Sarathian soil. Schematics for the very poison killing the queen. A collective gasp went through the city. In the throne hall, the High General froze. He looked at the massive screen above the throne. "Cut the feed," he screamed. "Cut it now." But the feed stayed, in the queen's chamber. Jace checked his weapon. "The city knows," he said. "Now we need to remove the tumor." The queen looked at Lyra. "Take my seal," she whispered, handing Lyra a heavy gold medallion. "Command the guard. Those who are still loyal will follow it. Lyra took the seal. She looked at Jace. To the throne hall? She asked. To the throne hall, Jace said. They left the queen with Rix and Zane to guard her. Jace, Lyra, and Kale marched toward the heart of the palace. They didn't sneak this time. They walked down the center of the main corridor. Guards rushed to intercept them. But when they saw Lyra holding the queen's seal, and when they saw the truth playing on the screens on the walls, they hesitated. Stand down, Lyra commanded, her voice ringing with authority. The general is a traitor. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. Some even fell into step behind them. By the time they reached the massive double doors of the throne hall, they had a small army at their back. Kale stepped forward. Knock, knock. He swung his hammer. The doors exploded inward. Jace and Lyra stepped through the debris and into the throne hall. It was a cavernous space of glass and light, suspended over the clouds. At the far end, standing on the dais, was the High General. Beside him stood Commander Sale. They were surrounded by the Serpent Elite, soldiers who were too deep in the conspiracy to turn back. So, the general boomed, his voice amplified by his armor. The ghost returns. I am not a ghost, Jace said, walking forward. I am the guy you tried to erase, and I am here to collect my back pay. Kill them, the general roared. The hall erupted into chaos. Laser fire filled the air. Jace and Lyra moved as one entity. They sprinted down the center aisle, dodging cover to cover. Lyra, on your left, Jace shouted, taking out a sniper on the balcony. Got him? Lyra slid under a table, firing upward. Sale leaped from the dais, landing in front of Lyra. She drew 2 energy blades, student and master. Sale sneered. Let us see if you remembered your lessons. Lyra drew her own blade, the one Jace had scavenged for her. I remember that you taught me honor. Sale. And I remember that you forgot it. They clashed. Sparks flew as blue and red energy met. It was a dance of lethal precision. Sale was stronger, but Lyra was faster. She fought with a desperate fury, fueled by the betrayal of the woman she had once looked up to. Jace kept moving toward the dais. The High General stood there, holding a massive plasma cannon. You are nothing, the general shouted, firing a blast that melted the floor where Jace had been a second before. You are a tool, a pawn we used to buy peace. Jace rolled, coming up behind a pillar. I was a tool, Jace yelled back. But today I am the hand that wields the hammer. He broke cover. He didn't run away from the cannon, he ran toward it. The general fired again. Jace slid on his knees, passing under the blast. He raised his pulse rifle and fired, not at the general, but at the chandelier hanging directly above the dais. The crystal fixture, weighing tons, sheared loose. The general looked up. Crash! The chandelier smashed onto the dais, burying the general in crystal and gold. Across the room, Lyra parried a strike from Sale. She spun, using the momentum to kick Sale's knee backward. Sale buckled. Lyra brought her blade down, stopping an inch from Sale's throat. Yield, Lyra commanded. Sale looked at the blade, then at the ruined dais where the general lay. She dropped her swords. I yield, she whispered. Silence fell over the hall. The Serpent Elites, seeing their leaders defeated, threw down their weapons. Jace climbed onto the wreckage of the dais. He pulled the High General from the debris. The massive Sarathian was groaning, his armor crushed. It is over, Jace said. They brought the queen into the throne hall on a hover stretcher. She looked small in the vast room, but her presence filled it. The cameras were rolling, broadcasting to the entire planet. Jace and Lyra stood on either side of her. My people, the queen said, her voice weak but amplified by the speakers. You have heard lies. Today, you see the truth. She gestured to Jace. This human. Jace was erased from our history. We stole his name to hide our own shame. But he returned. He saved me. He saved us all. She looked at the gathered crowd, nobles, soldiers, citizens. The era of secrets is over. The human pathogen was a lie created by those who sought power. Humanity is not our enemy. They are our allies. She turned to Lyra. Lyra, my shield, you are hereby appointed as the first Sarathian envoy to the human coalition. You will rebuild what we broke. Lyra knelt, taking the queen's hand. I will, Majesty. The queen looked at Jace one last time. She smiled, and for a second she looked young again. Thank you for remembering, she whispered. Her hand went slack. Her eyes closed. The monitors monitoring her vitals let out a long, high-pitched tone. The queen collapsed back onto the pillows. Majesty, Lyra cried, but she was gone. A wave of grief swept through the hall. Soldiers fell to their knees. But beneath the grief, there was relief. The coup was broken. The general was in chains. Jace stood there, holding Lyra's shoulder as she wept. He looked out at the city, where the lights were coming back on, chasing away the shadows. The war was over. But as he looked at the uncertainty on the faces of the crowd, he knew that the hard part was just beginning. He looked at Lyra. She stood up, wiping her tears. She looked at him, and he saw the strength that would carry her through the storm to come. We did it, she whispered. Yeah, Jace said, squeezing her hand. We did. He looked at the empty throne. Now we just have to figure out how to live with it. The funeral for the alien queen was a spectacle of white light and silence. Millions of citizens stood on the floating platforms of the Capitol, holding bioluminescent candles that turned the night into a sea of stars. It was beautiful, reverent, and for Jace, completely suffocating. He stood in the VIP gallery, dressed in a stiff ceremonial tunic that itched against his neck. Beside him, Lyra stood like a statue carved from sapphire, her face impassive, her grief hidden behind the mask of a royal guard. They were heroes. The screens broadcasting the ceremony said so. The saviors of the empire, the bridge between worlds. But as the days turned into weeks, and the mourning robes were traded for council sashes, Jace realized that being a hero was just another way of being a tool. The vacuum left by the Queen and the High General was filled by the Transitional Council. It was a 12-member body composed of surviving loyalists, nervous career politicians, and representatives from the merchant guilds who smelled profit in the chaos. They met in the Hall of Echoes, a circular chamber suspended high above the city clouds. Jace sat in the back, watching Lyra sit at the main table. She looked exhausted. The glowing markings on her skin were dim, reflecting the endless hours of debates, treaties, and damage control. The topic of the day, as it had been for the last 3 days, was stability. And the problem with stability, apparently, was Jace. Counselor Varric, a serpent-thin Sarathian with polished scales and a voice like oil, stood up. He gestured toward the holographic map of the Empire. We have quelled the riots in the lower sectors, Varric said smoothly. The truth of the High General's treason has been accepted. However, the human question remains volatile. He turned his slit-pupiled eyes toward Lyra. We cannot ignore the xenophobic factions in the outer systems. Dame Lyra, they see a human standing at the right hand of our new leadership, and they see weakness. They see occupation. Jace leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He knew this dance. He had seen it in the Earth military, and he saw it here. Lyra's voice cut through the room, sharp and cold. Jace is not an occupier, counselor. He is the reason you are not breathing biotoxin right now. We know this, Varric soothed, spreading his hands. And we are grateful. But politics is about perception, not gratitude. We need you, Lyra. The people trust you. The Queen named you her envoy. We want to offer you the position of High Chancellor. You would lead the reconstruction. You would shape the next century of our history. Lyra froze. It was the highest office in the land. It was a chance to fix everything that had been broken for generations. But, Varric continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room, there is a condition. To calm the factions, to ensure the transition is bloodless, the new chancellor must be seen as uncompromised. Jace felt the air leave the room. You mean I have to go? Jace said from the back of the room. Varric didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Lyra. A public distancing would be required. The human hero returns to his people with a generous pension and a medal. The Sarathian chancellor leads her people alone. It is a small sacrifice for peace. Lyra stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. It is not a small sacrifice, it is a lie. It is necessary, Varric snapped, dropping the facade. Do you want civil war, Lyra? Do you want the outer systems to secede? Because that is what happens if you parade your human lover around the capital like a trophy. The room erupted into shouting. Jay stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just looked at Lyra, saw the agony in her eyes, and walked out of the chamber. He found a spot on the western balcony of the palace, overlooking the sunset. The clouds beneath the floating city were turning a bruised purple, shot through with veins of gold. Jace leaned against the crystal railing, the wind whipping at his hair. He felt tired, not the physical exhaustion of the war, but a deep, spiritual fatigue. He had fought to remember who he was, only to be told that who he was wasn't convenient. He heard the soft chime of the glass doors sliding open behind him. He didn't turn. You should take the job, Jace said to the horizon. It pays well, and the office has a great view. Lyra stepped up beside him. She wasn't wearing her council sash anymore. She had torn it off. Do not mock me. Jace, I'm not mocking you, he said, turning to look at her. I am being practical. Varric is a snake, but he is right. Half this planet thinks I am a monster. The other half thinks I am a pet. If you stay with me, you lose your leverage. And if I leave you, Lyra asked, her voice trembling, what do I have then? Power? A title? I will be just like the Queen, alone in a tower, making decisions that eat away at my soul until there is nothing left. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. I fear that if I let you go, I will regret it every day for the rest of my life. I will look at the peace treaties and the trade deals, and I will hate them because they cost me you. But if you stay, Jace asked gently, if I stay, and the war starts again, if millions die because I was too selfish to make the hard choice, I do not know if I could live with that either. Jace sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. He reached out and covered her hand with his. I love you. Lyra, he said. The memory of loving you was the first thing that came back when I touched that crystal. But I won't be your excuse. Lyra looked at him, startled. What? I won't be the reason you walk away from your duty, Jace said firmly. And I won't be the sacrifice you resent in 10 years when the galaxy is burning. I refuse to be a prop in your story, whether it is the tragic lover or the inconvenient distraction. I want a real life. He looked out at the city. I want to wake up in the morning and not worry about poll numbers. I want to fix engines and drink bad coffee and argue with you about things that don't involve the fate of a solar system. Lyra looked down. That life is not possible here. No. Jace agreed. It isn't. Silence stretched between them, heavy and painful. Then Lyra looked up. Her eyes were not sad anymore. They were calculating. She looked like the warrior who had shot out the engine of a pursuing cruiser. We do not have to accept their binary choice, she said. Jace raised an eyebrow. You have a third option? I am not the queen, Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. I do not rule by divine right. I serve. So I will serve. She turned to him, grabbing the lapels of his tunic. I will go back in there and accept the role of High Chancellor, but only for a transition period. 2 years. 2 years? Jace asked. Long enough to purge the serpent corruption. Long enough to sign a binding treaty with the human coalition that protects veterans and integrates our economies. Long enough to make it impossible for the xenophobes to reverse the progress. And then I resign, she said. I set a precedent that power is something you hold for a moment, not a lifetime. I give the government back to the people. And what about us? Jace asked. What about the scandal? Let them talk, Lyra said fiercely. You will not be my pet. You will be my partner. We will travel. We will do the work on the ground. We will show them that a human and a Sarathian can build something together. And after the 2 years? Lyra smiled, a small, hopeful curve of her lips. After that, we disappear. We go to the frontier, to the edge of the maps where there are no councils and no cameras. Jace looked at her. He saw the fire in her. He saw the brilliance that had saved his life on the battlefield and the tenderness that had saved his sanity in the dark. 2 years, Jace said. 2 years, she promised. Jace grinned. Then you better get back in there and tell Varric to shut up. The next 2 years were a blur of motion, light, and exhaustion. They didn't stay in the palace. Lyra held true to her word. She turned the chancellorship into a mobile command. They traveled from the glitter of the core worlds to the mud-soaked outposts of the Rim. It was a grueling campaign, not of war, but of understanding. On the mining colony of Kest, Jace stood in a crowded mess hall filled with human veterans. These were men and women who had fought against the Sarathians, who bore the scars of plasma burns and the deeper, invisible scars of trauma. They looked at him with suspicion. To them, he was the traitor who slept with the enemy. I know you are angry, Jace told them, his voice amplified by a simple headset. I was angry too. I lost 5 years of my life to this machine. I lost my name. He walked into the crowd, looking a scarred Marine in the eye. But anger is a fuel that burns dirty, he said. It chokes you. You can let the war define you until you die, or you can decide that surviving is the best revenge. The Sarathians aren't the enemy anymore. The enemy is the idea that we can't live without fighting. He stayed for hours, shaking hands, listening to stories, drinking terrible synthetic beer. He wasn't a symbol there. He was just a soldier who had made it out. Meanwhile, on the university world of Wara, Lyra stood before an amphitheater of 5,000 Sarathian students. They taught you that obedience is the highest virtue, Lyra's voice rang out. They taught you that the queen speaks for the stars. She paced the stage, radiant in simple robes, stripped of her royal armor. They were wrong. Blind obedience is the death of a civilization. You must question everything. You must question the council. You must question history. You must even question me. She stopped, looking out at the sea of young violet faces. Power does not belong to the palace. It belongs to you. Do not give it away to anyone who demands your silence as the price of their protection. It wasn't all speeches and stress. There were moments, stolen in the quiet spaces between systems, where they remembered why they were fighting. There was a diplomatic reception on a luxury station orbiting a neutron star. The gravity was set to low, allowing the guests to drift like dancers. The music was a complex polyphonic Sarathian waltz. Jace, wearing a tuxedo that he complained was trying to strangle him, pulled Lyra onto the floor. "People are staring," Lyra whispered, though she leaned into his touch. "Let them stare," Jace said. "They have never seen a human lead a waltz before." He spun her, their bodies floating inches off the floor. For a moment, the whispers of the courtiers, the glare of the cameras, the weight of the treaties, it all fell away. There was just the warmth of her hand in his, the scent of her skin, and the shared rhythm of two hearts beating in sync. "I am going to step on your toes," Jace warned. "I am wearing armored boots beneath this gown," Lyra replied with a smirk. "Try your best," and later, on a dusty frontier settlement called New Hope, they sat on the flat roof of a prefab hab unit. The air was thin and cold, but they had a thermal blanket wrapped around them. Above them, the stars were thick and strange, unrecognizable from the charts of Earth or Serath Prime. 1 year and 4 months, Jace murmured, looking at the sky. "Are you counting the days?" Lyra asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "I am counting the seconds," Jace said. He pointed to a cluster of blue stars near the horizon. "What about that sector? Far out? No trade lanes?" "It is wild space," Lyra said sleepily. "There are twin moons in that system. The grass is purple and grows as tall as a man." "Sounds like a lot of lawn work," Jace joked. "It sounds like peace," Lyra corrected. The resignation of High Chancellor Lyra was the most watched broadcast in galactic history. She stood at the podium in the Hall of Echoes, 2 years to the day after taking office. The treaties were signed. The Veteran Protection Acts were law. The trade routes were open. "I have done what I promised," she told the galaxy. "Now, I give the future to you." She didn't wait for the applause. She didn't wait for the questions. She walked off the stage, down the back corridor, and out the service exit where a battered, modified freighter, the Grey Heron, was waiting. Jace was in the pilot's seat. The engines were already humming. "Ready?" he asked as she strapped in. Lyra looked at her data pad, overflowing with messages from panicked counselors. She turned it off and tossed it into the recycling bin. "Fly," she said. 5 years later. The planet didn't have an official name on the star charts, but the locals called it Two Moons. It was a world of rolling violet prairies, jagged mountains, and storms that swept in from the ocean with terrifying beauty. On a bluff overlooking a sprawling valley sat a compound. It was a hodgepodge of structures, a hangar built from the hull of a decommissioned frigate, a row of small cabins, and a main house with a wraparound porch. The sign above the hangar gate read, "Skybreak Station, Repairs, Refuel, Recovery." Inside the hangar, sparks rained down from the underbelly of a beat-up mining skiff. "Hand me the hydro spanner," Jace called out from under the chassis. "No, the big one. The one I use for stubborn bolts and stubborn people." A 3-armed mechanic, a young alien from the Rim, handed him the tool. "Boss, the regulator is fused. We should just replace it. We fix it." "Kiro," Jace grunted, wrenching the bolt. "We don't throw things away just because they are broken. That is rule number 1. He slid out from under the ship, wiping grease from his face. He was 40 now. The gray in his hair had spread, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but he looked lighter. The haunted look that had shadowed him for a decade was gone. replaced by the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. He walked out into the sunlight. Lyra was in the training yard. She was teaching a group of 6 teenagers, 2 humans, 3 Sarathians, and 1 species Jace didn't recognize, how to defend themselves with a staff. She moved with the same fluid grace as always, but her movements were tempered, controlled. She wasn't training soldiers, she was training survivors. "Keep your center," she called out, tapping a human boy's leg with her staff. "If you fight with anger, you have already lost. Fight to protect, not to punish." She saw Jace watching her and paused. She flashed him a smile that made his chest ache. "Is the coffee ready?" she asked. "It is cooking," Jace shouted back, "which means it is black, hot, and probably tastes like engine oil." "My favorite," she teased. That evening, a storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruising purple, and lightning arced between the twin moons. The wind howled against the reinforced walls of their home. Inside, it was warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. Jace and Lyra sat on the rug, surrounded by a few of the strays they had taken in, travelers passing through, kids with nowhere else to go. Kiro, the young mechanic, was looking at an old holographic picture Jace kept on the mantel. It was the image from the history books, Jace and Lyra at the signing of the Great Treaty. "Boss?" Kiro asked, looking from the picture to Jace. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" Jace asked, and stirring the stew pot hanging over the fire. "The power, the fame." Kiro hesitated. "You were the most important person in the galaxy. They took 5 years of your life, then gave you the world, and you walked away. Do you regret what was taken?" The room went quiet. The wind battered the windows. Jace put the spoon down. He looked at Lyra. She was watching him, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "I regret the years I lost," Jace said honestly. "I regret that I missed my mother's funeral because I was a ghost in a machine. I regret the pain I caused Lyra by forgetting her." He picked up a bowl and handed it to Kiro. "But I don't regret the choice. I don't regret saving the Queen. And I definitely don't regret walking away from the statues they built of me." He leaned back, resting his arm on his knee. "Power is heavy, kid. It's a coat that never fits quite right. But this," he gestured around the room, "the warmth, the friends, the woman he loved, this is mine. I chose this. And that makes it worth more than any empire." Lyra spoke up then, her voice soft but commanding the attention of every young soul in the room. "History is a story told by the people who win," she said. "They can rewrite the battles. They can rename the planets. But the way you treat the people you love, the way you help a stranger when no one is watching, that is the only record that cannot be erased. That is the only truth that stays." She reached out and took Jace's hand, and it is the only legacy worth leaving. Later that night, the storm broke. The clouds scattered, leaving a sky washed clean and filled with an impossible number of stars. Jace stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of rain and ozone-charged grass. The twin moons were rising, casting long double shadows across the valley. Lyra joined him. She was wearing one of his old flight shirts, which was far too big for her, over her leggings. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. They stood there in silence for a long time, watching the galaxy turn. "It is quiet tonight," Lyra whispered. "Yeah," Jace said. "It is." She tightened her arms around him, pressing a kiss to the base of his neck. "You know," she murmured, a playful lilt in her voice, "for a moment back there with the stew. You sounded wise, almost like a philosopher. Don't get used to it." Jace chuckled. I was just reading a fortune cookie wrapper I found in the crate. Lyra laughed, a low melodic sound that vibrated against his back. She turned him around so she could look into his eyes. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and the gold in her eyes. The bioluminescent markings on her face pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. A heartbeat of light. She leaned into his side, her voice dropping to a whisper, half teasing, half earnest. You remember me now? Human? Jace looked at her. He looked at the face that had haunted his dreams when he had no memory. He looked at the woman who had crossed the galaxy to find him. He looked at his past, his present, and his future. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never forget. He pulled her close, and they stood together under the endless, star-scattered sky. Two survivors who had turned political conspiracy, war, and stolen memories into a life defined by chosen love, hard-earned peace, and the courage to start over.